Welcome to the Cape and Islands podcast, where we cover local people, their stories, important community topics, some interesting visitors, a little bit of history, but most importantly, we work to build a stronger community. In this episode, I am back with Michael Judge Jones, who you may remember from our first episode about artificial intelligence way back in November 2023. Or possibly you recall the Roland Sherman interview that we did way back August 3rd, 2024. Definitely check out those episodes. But regarding this episode, we are not going to be short on material, that's for sure. This episode will contain material from 3 separate occasions over the course of the past year discussing artificial intelligence, where Michael has been promoting his new book titled What Art Is Now: Creativity in the Age of AI, published by Bloomsbury Academic. I'm actually going to put these in reverse order of when they happened, starting with the most recent presentation Michael gave at Snow Library on May 26th, followed by his interactive session at the Tap Room May 7th. And finally, I'll be including some clips from our interview at the Orleans Citizens Forum that was held at the Orleans Historical Society building in June 2025. So buckle up, because this is over 3 hours of awesome material. Also, if you're interested, the video for all of this will be on my Patreon page. Link is in the description. Videos from episodes will always be free on Patreon, but please also feel free to subscribe. It helps the channel a lot. Speaking of which, thank you to all of our supporters on Patreon that help this podcast continue. And special shout out to our Lighthouse level supporters, Christine and Michael Jones, Johanna Skilling, and John Ciangoli. And thank you all so much for listening.
I have to tell you, Joan exaggerates. I met her about 15 minutes ago, so, but thank you for the introduction. Clark and I have done this little Dog and Pony podcast show. We started a couple years ago, and believe it or not, ChatGPT is only 2 years old. And we first did this podcast, what is this thing called artificial intelligence? We were sort of in the learning stage, as much of the public has. Clark used it quite often. I was one of the early users of ChatGPT, owned by OpenAI, and you probably know OpenAI is in the process of going public soon. Anthropic will be shortly thereafter, and Elon Musk, SpaceX will follow sometime later this summer. But I'll turn it over to Clark to ask some questions, and this will be an open format. We'll have our discussion, but we also want to hear from all of you as well.
Yes, 2 years ago, and we were sort of really experimenting at that time, and we all have been experiencing a lot of changes in AI. Your book really speaks to a lot of the things that we've talked about in past conversations. But really, ultimately, I know this, but why did you write this book?
Yeah. So as Joe mentioned, I've taught quite a bit and also done quite a bit at the Olympic level, being a judge and somewhat of an athlete back in the day. And frankly, besides sports, my area of interest is copyright, intellectual property, primarily copyrights and trademarks, not so much patents. That's a different area. And certainly as it relates to AI, what I was concerned about is the early versions of the chatbots as we know them were just scraping data. Every Instagram photo, every text, everything, and asking no permission. They were using images and recreating it based on a prompt that somebody gave. So in the early days of AI, it was basically a prompt machine. So I just have a little diagram here, and we would call it sort of the long language models. And initially it was text. Think about Grammarly. You put a word in and it corrects your spelling, or it helps you with a sentence structure. These large language models rather, are to the power of 100 to that. Very effective at doing it. Somewhat cost effective compared to the latest versions. But keep this in mind, even though they create output, it's based on algorithmic models. It's based on prediction. You ask it to do something, and as it has more data, as it looks at more images and more text, it predicts what you think you want to finish the rest of the sentence with. And it does it based on just experience, not intuition, but experience. And so the more data it has, and the more times you tell it it's hallucinating or creating something, cats don't have, usually they don't have 5 legs and 3 ears, it gets better. And there's no question these models are very good. So if you just think of this particular, what we're all familiar with, the basic ChatGPT or Anthropic, Claude, Gemini, they're good at what they do if you just look at output. But what we have to distinguish is, what is this output? How can we use it? We can use it as a collaborative tool, but at the same time, what gets lost? And what gets lost is us. We get lost in the humanity if we decide to rely upon it to answer all our questions, which many people are. Still makes lots of mistakes. Now, we're not even on to the agentic AI, which we can move on to. One other thing I want to point out, I don't know if you can see it, but this is our brain, the synapses. You know, we take in information, we take in experiences, and we learn from it. And we make decisions. We make informed decisions based on life experiences. There is none of that. These artificial nodes mimic the human brain. They are not the human brain. They don't reason the way we do. They don't have feelings. They don't have emotions. And you may communicate with them in a manner that it makes it seem like they're human and seem like they're intelligent. And frankly, I don't even like the term intelligent associated with it, because then I think we all in our language models think that, oh, they're smart. They're not smart. They're good at creating outcome based on what the inquiry is. But that doesn't make them wise. They don't know how to use that information. That's our task and our role, which we can't lose, because this is a slippery slope that's easy to lose.
Chapter 3 is my favorite chapter because it's about creativity versus the machine. And, you know, what is creativity with AI? And copyright, you speak a lot about how it's the human hand. Well, is the human hand the prompt engineer? You know, and okay, people are now claiming that. And I just was reminded of this. I just saw a play, The Importance of Being Earnest, by two friends of mine, Nick and Kirsten, directed it. And I was looking up, how does Oscar Wilde get paid? He was one of the first playwrights to get paid royalty. And that was new in England at the time. Prior to that, they would sell it usually for a single fee. Mm-hmm. And then Americans were ripping him off. There was any rights. So they could make all the money they wanted on his plays until the late 1800s. It was just interesting because, okay, that right to that creation. Now, if somebody iterates on that, mm-hmm. if I were to say, write me a play in my voice. I've got a YouTube channel, Instagram, I've got the podcast. So AI could emulate what I would do. Be like, write me a play in the style of Oscar Wilde, but in my voice. Go. Do I own that?
Yes, you own it, but AI doesn't own it. However, the Library of Congress, which oversees our copyright law, says that anything created by AI is not copyrightable. Now, that's subject to public hearings because there are lots of folks that think that there ought to be. And the distinguishing reason that the Library of Congress, the Copyright Office, said it's not copyrightable, because it's missing one thing. 1841, John Rand created this new technology, a paint tube. And before that, you had to make your own paint. Once he did this, it was an explosion of artists, because no longer were you spending all your time creating your paints, but now you could paint outdoors. You could paint plein air. And to paint, it takes the human hand. It takes a brush. And that's why that painting and that painting and that painting are all copyrightable. The Library of Congress says there is no human hand in an AI-created image, text, whatever the case may be. Now, there's so much blurring. There was a gentleman I was talking to coming in here about Fortune magazine, about a 27-year-old Chinese gentleman that created some code and became a billionaire. There are a lot of folks doing that. And I've noticed Fortune magazine, the magazine you happen to mention, there are articles now that say at the bottom, AI assisted. AI assisted. So we're starting to blur that line. How much of it is the human imagination, the human thought, and how much of it is just a response to a prompt based on statistically the algorithms think this is what the answer you're looking for. And if not, you tell it. And in terms of copyright, and Clark's absolutely right, this whole process for me started because of my interest in terms of copyright infringement and trademark infringement. There's over $1 trillion of litigation against the AI companies for copyright violations. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, probably everything you folks have done. I was the Fulbright, Nehru Fulbright specialist for India a couple of years ago, about 2018 or 19, and teaching copyright law to Indian law students and lawyers and actually Indian government. And I jokingly say what they really weren't interested in, they were less interested in copyright and trademark law. They wanted to know how they could garner more money, more publicity rights for their cricket players, just like your NBA players. At the end of the day, that's what they wanted to know. But one of the students in there was a daughter of one of the high judges, and her image was appearing on billboards throughout India without her permission. And it was an image of her from Instagram that some AI model translated, put it on there saying she was promoting a product. And her dad was outraged, and she was in the class basically to learn, how do we stop this? How do you stop it? And so while this is one step in the technological change, and your iPhone or whatever phone you have is certainly another, which the computational power in this thing is beyond belief. But there are no regulations. That is one thing that's clear. There are no rules. We live in a capitalistic society. If you take the Magnificent Seven stocks, Amazon, Nvidia, Microsoft, Meta, they are 35% of the entire market capitalization of the US equities market, 35%. Elon Musk is responsible for 2.7% of the entire GDP of the US. The only person ever recorded near that was John Rockefeller at 1.7% of gross domestic product. So Elon Musk is almost double that in terms of his economic power. And these folks are so competitive, whether it's Peter Thiel from PayPal, or whether it's Sam Altman at OpenAI, whether it's the Anthropic folks, they're so competitive. And they talk about wanting rules and some regulation. And even Pope Leo XIV yesterday, or rather 2 days ago, came out and said, and I thought it was an interesting analogy, he said, we have rules regarding nuclear arsenal and nuclear disarmament. We have no rules for AI. And we need rules. If we don't, as somebody out there, an analogy that I use, we've created a Frankenstein that was supposed to serve us, and soon we'll be serving Frankenstein. You'll be serving AI if we don't put brakes.
Very true. And we talked about this a long time ago, and we're right there still. Elon Musk, interesting character, right? PE ratio of Tesla, 350. That's wild. So we know the IPO is about to come out for SpaceX. Bad news for anybody who has a pension. It's going to be in the NASDAQ 100. Really controversial. It means we're all investing in that. We're all going to be investing in SpaceX, if you want to or not, if you have a pension. Big, big controversy. But when we're talking about these technologies, Grok, he's really sort of, at this point, they built the two giant, I forget what, the Colossus 1, Colossus 2. And at this point, Grok isn't really profitable at all. So he's renting space to Anthropic, which actually is showing a small profit. OpenAI is about to dumb down their free version, and the $20 version is going to be limited quite a bit. So there's a lot of change happening really quickly. I know OpenAI is rushing for their IPO as well. And it's sort of like before people figure it out. So, and the SpaceX initial documentation was pretty staggering to see like how bad their numbers actually are. But I do think about this quite a bit. Is this not only going to economically hurt us, but also the protections that are in the system aren't really there. And on top of that, it's a new threat to creatives. Like, as you mentioned in your book and in our other conversations, people were threatened by the camera when it first came out. And they're like, the painters were very upset. I paint, now you're taking away my work. Do we think we're gonna lose jobs? Do we think this is a threat to employment? Do we think this is a threat to our economy? As you mentioned, it's such a huge part of our GDP now. Is it real?
Yeah, it's all of that. And that's probably the most frequently asked question when we speak to audiences. You're all probably maybe less concerned about your economic status, but you're concerned about your kids and certainly your grandkids. And I get asked all the question, what should my kids study in school? You know, thinking about where the jobs are, where the jobs are going to be lost. I think it depends a lot. I'm in the legal profession, so to speak, and I don't know what you need a paralegal for anymore, because all these AI models can draft documents. You show them one, and you know, somebody asked me about a title to a house. How hard is that for, you know, ChatGPT or Anthropic to do? It's pretty easy. Now, meanwhile, those models will tell you, you know, we're not a law firm, we're not providing legal advice, and yet they plow through and provide whatever legal questions you want. Denise probably can do a purchase and sale agreement using, you know, some of these. It is scary, which shows that, you know, you need, being a curator isn't enough, because we don't want to lose authorship. But that's an example of curating. Yeah, there was a question there. Yeah, no, it is a machine. And what's called tokens, there's a certain weight that it gives every sort of term, every sort of word you put in there. And statistically, it knows which words should have greater weight to lead to the result that you want, whether it's words or images. There is no human intuition, there's no human judgment. It's just doing math inside a machine. Frankly, nobody knows how these machines work. There's a guy by the name of Geoffrey Hinton, just to throw out some statistics, and he won the Nobel Prize for machine learning and AI. And so he's one of the leading lights in this whole industry. And he believes there's a 20 to 30% likelihood that human existence will end because of AI. If you watched any of Pope Leo XIV, sitting 3 seats away from him was a gentleman named Christopher Olah, O-L-A-H, co-founder of Anthropic. He's in the same boat as Geoffrey Hinton, and that is, we're in danger of becoming an extinct species if we're not more careful. To answer your question, I know my publisher is Bloomsbury, and I couldn't use any AI. I wanted to put some examples of deep fakes and things of that sort in the book, and they wouldn't even let me do that. And I reminded them, I helped write your AI policy a couple of years ago, and I don't remember anything in there saying I couldn't use an example of AI, but you know, new leadership. But let's be a little more specific. So mid-level administrative jobs, you're done. Clerical jobs, data processing, you're done. We're never gonna have what they call tier 1 when you call, you know, Otter Cape for health or whatever. You're never going to have a human voice. That's tier 1. It's all going to be AI. You watch any movies. One of my best friends is a big Hollywood director, and his next movie, just if you're interested, is they're doing a remake of Miami Vice using the original script. Really interesting. And I just talked to him last week about it. I said, are you going to use AI? Yeah, we'll use AI for background. Yeah, you know, for showing cars that were in whatever, the 70s or 80s, whatever, that original one. You know, crowds. Yeah, we go to movies and you see all these soldiers. Those aren't real soldiers anymore. They're AI generated. Now, the Screen Actors Guild, which represents actors, has been on and off strike for a long time related to this very issue, because Adrian Brody, who won Best Actor, right, for The Brutalist, my wife knows what they did with his voice without telling us. And transparency is important. What they did was used AI to make him sound more Hungarian, and they did not disclose that until after he won Best Actor award. I think that's morally and ethically wrong. I think you need to have transparency. If AI is creating your painting or writing your poem, you need to tell us. We need to know. And what's interesting is they've done consumer polls. If they show AI-generated work of art and disclose it in a human art, somewhat similar images, and ask, the patrons, which would you buy? Over 75% said, I'm going to buy the human one. I still want that human connection. But that requires disclosure. There are lots of positives to it. There's no question. It's an incredible collaborative tool. It for certain tasks, it is so efficient. It is so fast when it's learned to perform this task. So the Wharton School, which is one of my alma maters, worked with the Boston Consulting Group in the early stages of AI, and had one group of mid-level management people have access to the latest AI and another not have access. The group that had access was 37% more efficient. They got the job done faster, quicker, and on target. Now, there are also other studies when you ask people to do something and you sort of set them up just to use AI and then explain what it is the outcome was, they can't explain it. I still teach, and if there are educators in here, education is the scariest one. I teach some online courses or law courses and essay for the most part. And I will be honest with you that, the better, AI bots can answer all these questions really, really well. And in the beginning, which was, a year plus ago or 2 years ago, I could tell when any student had used AI. I've used it so much. They're better now. So now I require them, because what I'm concerned about is losing the ability to question, to think critically, to make judgment. And just because you have outcomes doesn't mean that they're good outcomes, that they just have answered what they think you want, which is maybe not what we want. But it is a challenge, to be honest with you, as an educator moving forward. I have a daughter that reads admissions papers for Bentley University, undergrads. And I said to her, this was again about 2 years ago, have you noticed a difference in the quality? And she was not familiar with AI. She said, yeah, they've gotten a lot better. I said, can you have a conversation with your admissions director? Because there's a reason they're a lot better. Instead of the parents writing them, AI is a better writer than the parents, right? We all know that.
Yeah. So we talked about this a long time ago, just as far as the copyright, certified human made, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But who's going to do that?
Yeah.
And that's becoming popularized, that people want to know that it's a human made product or video or song. Music, don't even get me started.
Yeah.
But the other thing I wanted to mention is you've got the neural net. You've got this huge power of basically all human knowledge almost at the hands of this machine. It can pass the Turing test in some cases, right? And you speak to this in the book. Is that what qualifies as a human in level intelligence? And I don't think we all know this yet, but what does? Because it's making binary choices, but it has more knowledge than any one of us. And I'll just add as a note, it's actually wrong more now, I feel like, than it was when we first started using it. I think they're giving out, it's so large. I catch it, you have to have some knowledge on the topic, because I've caught it being wrong a lot on energy and things like that. And I'm like, oh, you got that totally wrong. It's like, oh yeah, sorry, it's off by a factor of 100.
Yeah.
My bad. It's like, well, if you're a student, you don't know.
Yeah.
So, but when you're talking about the Turing test, it's a very interesting thing that it can fool, a person, or that you can believe it's a human level intelligence. Can you speak to that? Because you speak to it well in the book.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. One of the, I guess, little benefits of kind of whatever little position I'm in is I've had the opportunity to communicate and correspond with some of the real deep thinkers in this that have written some interesting books. And there was a book that just came out. It was about Demis Habaeus, and he's the one who won a Nobel Prize in chemistry without being a chemist, because he devised an AI machine that at the molecular level could break down some protein related to some DNA thing. Not a chemist, brilliant man. And his definition of intelligence was the Turing test. And Alan Turing, you all probably know of him. And it basically says that if a machine can create some output that sounds human, then it's intelligent. There's a woman named Ada Lovelace who was much earlier, a mathematician, female mathematician, much earlier than Turing. And she says that's not good enough. A lot of machines can perform tasks that you ask them to do, but it lacks judgment, it lacks intentionality, it lacks consciousness. I brought this painting up that just to give you, in my mind, an example of what it kind of means to be human versus machine. So I have Nina and some Mike and a couple of our other friends that are pickleball players. And there's a pickleball guy that I know, Larry, who makes fun of me all the time. And we get along really, really well. Larry was president of one of the banks in town for a while. And Larry clams a lot. And frequently when he clams, when you want to have red tide on Town Cove, he brings them to our house, or we go to his house and we steam them and have them. And so from my perspective, I can thank him, and I have thanked him. But to me, that wasn't enough. I needed to show more gratitude. So without telling him, I've created this. Now, I didn't go on the shoreline and take a photo of him. This is part my imagination and part my memory of how he walks and how he holds himself. And it's not perfect yet, but this is the difference between what humans do, because it isn't just about the clams. It's about somebody caring about somebody else. It's about hunter-gatherers. It's about being part of a community that Nina and Mike, we're part of a community in terms of our love for certain kind of sports and others. Eduardo and I, we're part of a community. We're neighbors. And we care about each other. And this is a way of translating feelings into emotions, into thought. And the thought is using my imagination to tell them thank you. And AI can't do any of that. They don't have any of that. They can create output that looks like this, but it doesn't have the same emotional pull, feelings, and draw. And that's what we can't lose. And conversations like this are what hopefully help us to remind ourselves that we have to work together to retain that human quality.
So the human quality is being actively emulated with these technologies, as you speak, in just the artwork, but now video, audio, deep fakes. Somebody that is at a high level has made the truth no longer matter, but technology just caught up. And it's a big issue. This was just on the news this morning. A woman, veteran, got convinced that her daughter got kidnapped. She sent $5,400. It was AI on the voice was pulled from Instagram of her daughter. And I'll tell you what I'm doing with my family. We've created a code word. So if there's ever any urgency, if there's ever any transactions, what's the code word? What's the password? And we all know what that word is. The AI will never know that word. It'll know everything about us, because the data brokers buy all of our stuff, but it'll never know that password. And that's how the only solution I've been able to figure out. Like, if there's this pressing issue, the video looks real, the audio looks real, they're talking like the person, what do you do? So we're like, okay, password, and don't write it down.
Yeah. And that's a great example, but it's also an example of how we now lose trust in our institutions. And we don't know who to trust. We don't know what to trust. Right? None of us. And it's interesting you have that example. One of my students, it happened to her grandparents. The same thing. Sent $15,000. All AI generated. They knew everything about her. They knew her voice, where she was, because they posted, right? Everywhere. Everybody's posting everything, sharing everything. And they sent $15,000. Never got it back.
Oh, it's dangerous, and that dollar amount is enough that most people that are well-to-do might have available for an emergency. So they know they're targeting people that probably have about $5,000 that they can send it.
Yeah.
They're not going for $50,000.
Yeah.
They're going for like, okay, I've got enough to save my daughter in this exact moment.
Those are fabulous questions. There are a host of defamation cases where AI has published, based on a prompt, things about people that are inaccurate, that damage their reputation. As serious as that is, the more serious ones deal with social media, whether it's Meta or Facebook, whatever, especially for young women are particularly vulnerable. And there are lawsuits about encouraging people to commit. How would you commit suicide, and is it okay to commit suicide? And people have acted upon it, especially young people. And there was a case in California now, maybe 2 months ago, state court, not a federal court, where they found, I think it was Facebook and somebody, one of the AI, liable. The judgment wasn't as large as I thought. This young girl committed suicide. Like 3 million or something, which is chicken feed to Google and Facebook. But there are plenty of those cases that are coming down, and the law does have a place, because. And what's interesting is, let me just say this: that they won the case analogizing to cigarette industry, where the cigarette industry told us that tobacco was safe, and then they knew that it wasn't. They failed to disclose it. They misinformed the public. They misled us. And so they lost a lot of these cases because of product liability. They weren't truthful in their advertising. And that's the theory they used to win this case, that whether it's Instagram, Facebook, whatever the social media platform you are, they're not being honest about the perils, they're talking the perils of it. And that sometimes they give bad advice or misinformation. And that's how the case was won. Because there's a federal statute, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which basically gives all these platforms immunity from liability. So that has to change. And everybody in Congress agrees it can change, but nobody wants to agree what the language is. I was two kind of judges. I was a circuit court judge, which meant that I dealt with misdemeanors, felony probable cause. I knew the law pretty well. The kind of cases I had. I didn't need to refer to AI to help me answer what is the latest Supreme Court decision on whatever the facts may be or whatever the issue may be. I was an international tribunal judge dealing with, I'll just say it politely, corruption at the highest level of sports. And again, I'm dealing with fairly narrow area of the law that I knew pretty well because I wrote one of the first books on sports law in 1981. And I've had many publications, so I kind of know that law pretty well. But if I were a young lawyer, I might take a look. But to Clark's point, if I'm looking at Anthropic, I'm going to run the Anthropic answer against Gemini and see what they say.
They do actually perform really well when you say that you've used a rival AI for the first pass.
Yeah.
It's remarkable. So there's hard coding, and there you might have seen where it couldn't figure out how to spell strawberry. ChatGPT. It's like there's 2 R's in strawberry, and the guy has like ran through it a million times. They actually hard coded how to spell strawberry into ChatGPT, because if you say spell strawberry and you spell it the wrong way, it'll actually still give the wrong answer. So it's like it knows that word, and they hard coded it, which is very odd. So there's certain things it can't figure out still, but it does do well. Once you're on track with it, it's phenomenal, but it can be wrong. You have to know your subject, I suppose. But speaking of subjects, we're only as good as our next generation, right? We've got a lot of students that are engulfed in technology, Chromebooks, every single kid has one. Now there's the AI, there's the social media, there's many layers to this. My nieces and Brewster, it's well intended to have technology so they know how to use the Chromebooks. But there's been some talk about how comprehension, reading, all these things have plummeted since Chromebooks and technology came into the classroom. And let's also be honest, it's a private corporation in every school in America, maybe not the best thing. But how is education vulnerable? How are teachers going to navigate this? There's this whole thing of every test is in person. There's no homework because it's all done by AI now. How are people going to teach? How are kids going to learn in this new world where it's just so easy to have it right every time?
Well, if you listen to Sam Altman, he says that there's no need for anybody to go to college anymore, because we're just going to train them to do what we want. And I think that'll be a trend. I think all these high-tech companies will create their own sort of learning universe. Think about the giants. How many of them just quit school? I don't need this. I can figure this out. Now, what they're missing is humanity, how to communicate, how to deal with people, and things and things of that note. If you're teaching in a laboratory or physical space, I think it's a little bit easier because you can get out the blue books again and pens and papers, and you can watch them. I teach online, and what I have decided to do is the midterm and the oral, I teach via Zoom, we're going to have a conversation. So your midterm exam and final exam are not going to be written, but I'm going to give you 3 different legal issues, and I'm going to pick one of them, and you study all 3, and then we're going to have a conversation. And it'll be pretty easy for me to tell what your level is. It's incredibly time consuming. Those midterms and finals take hours. I have 30 kids in a class. Picture how long this takes. I haven't quite figured it out. There's a gentleman named Professor Malik at Wharton, who I follow a lot, who's well known and educator. And again, we've communicated a little bit. He hasn't figured it out any better than anybody else. I wish I had a better answer.
What happens to the human emotion of love, understanding, and compassion? Will that gradually just kind of evaporate if this takes hold?
That's the fear, because if we're not using our neurons and relying upon artificial neurons, then that is the fear. We lose the capacity to care about the person sitting next to you. Yeah.
Well,
think of the distrust that so many people have of government, of any institution. Who can you trust? Can you trust anybody?
And how do you come back? What's the antidote to that? Antidote to this, what's going on? Is there an antidote to what we're talking about can happen?
I just want to add a piece of encouragement to this. I had a lovely conversation with my 10-year-old grandson. And, he was discussing movies. And, I think that is a lot of, he's a 10-year-old boy, it's all this science fiction, fanciful, good and evil, all that kind of thing. And I just kept encouraging him that that we're the humans, we are in charge, and it is up to his generation to make sure those guardrails are in place and they are created. So I will say, I was really impressed with his thought process in it, and that then all of a sudden he was like, oh yeah, what I'm thinking about this has a voice. And I think that's vital for exactly what you were referring to. We've got to remind this next generation
Yeah.
that they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I probably all saw it. There were a lot of commencement speakers that talked about AI, and almost to a T, they were all booed. Now, I'm not sure that's not the anecdote, but it's an expression of people's concern. And we haven't even, got to the data centers thing, but think of AI more than just that little, chatbot over there. It's energy. Use an incredible amount. It's infrastructure. It's silicon. It's land use.
Water.
They need cooling. It's got to be cool. There is not enough energy to go around, given all the data centers we're building. And some communities, like the state of Maine, almost banned it, but then the governor did a reversal. Utah, yeah.
The big one right now.
Yeah. So think of that. And even when people talk about the cloud, you think of the cloud as up there. No, the cloud is infrastructure. It's these hyperscalers. The cloud is Amazon, Google, Meta. All right, that's the cloud. It's the same 7 plus add OpenAI and a couple of others.
Well, let's talk about the data centers quick, because that's a huge hot button issue. Our governor has, well, so far we don't have a ton. Our new economic development secretary is very pro AI. Soon after he came into office, you probably saw the press release where the governor said we're going to use AI in the state government, and they chose to use ChatGPT. We don't have too many data centers here, but there's a lot of not only energy issues and water issues, but health issues, low frequency sound waves that are making it impossible to live near to these things. What do you think the future in Massachusetts, because it's different in every state, but what do you think it looks like here? We've been a strong technology-based economy for a long time with MIT, Harvard, Tufts. So where do you think Massachusetts is going next?
The last talk I gave, somebody asked, and I looked it up. I think Mass has 30 plus data centers, but not the large ones. Our geography is just not susceptible to building large data centers. That's why they're in Utah and Arizona and New Mexico and places like that have larger territory. But even if the tech companies tell you that, okay, we're going to finance it. And the thing that you got to keep in mind, you throw in SoftBank here, it's like a closed loop. The chip people are helping with the hardware people, helping with the software people, borrowing money from SoftBank, and they just keep going like this. And it's like funny money that just kind of moves around. So I don't think we're going to see large data centers here. But at the same time, we'll rely upon it's got to come from somewhere. Elon Musk wants to create data centers, outside our atmosphere, and maybe, he's a pretty innovative guy. Maybe it'll happen.
Interesting note on that.
A lot of money, to build these data centers.
Just an interesting note about the amount of debris in space right now. When those satellites burn into the atmosphere, it creates a massive amount of toxic metal in the upper atmosphere that takes about 15 to 20 years to get to our ozone layer. And scientists are now saying, this is going to be in 20 years a massive problem. And so if the SpaceX IPO goes out and he gets 1.7 trillion, which is the prediction, he's going to be a madman. And he's going to then use this new rocket to send a bunch of these to create the data center in the sky. So how dangerous is this? There are no rules. No one's driving. Our government certainly isn't seemingly driving at all. If anything, they're profiting from insider dealing. And that's a bipartisan issue. So how do we move forward when it feels like we're just in this post-capitalist or late-stage capitalist nightmare, and we have no control. Not to be so down about it.
Yeah. You know, you know, to the extent that it means something, that I've sent copies of my book to influential federal and state politicians. Say, here's my premise, here's my concerns. You know, frankly, Pope Leo XIV has probably said it better and with a much larger audience. I mean, he's concerned about all the things we talked about, and even weaponry. That, you know, we can't have automated, you know, weapons without the human element involved. And we all know they can put the drones up that are led by, you know, AI without any human input. I mean, that's the loss of humanity. I wish I had a better answer. We keep talking about it. I've tried to influence political people. I've had discussions with, you know, all these brilliant, deep-mind people like, hey, these are my concerns, and these are the reasons why. And they don't, none of them disagree, but they just say, no, but we think this is a better model. We think the Turing idea is better than Ada Lovelace.
In the 1940s and 50s, the world's answer to the threat of nuclear power and nuclear bombs was controlling plutonium.
Mm-hmm.
Today, we still do that to a certain extent as civilization. Can you ever see a world where we control the distribution of chips, NVIDIA chips?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Yeah.
I think we're kind of facing that right now, just to hop on that one, because Taiwan is clearly the top of mind object because of their massive chip manufacturing abilities. China is a rising power, and all the biggest, the Magnificent Seven were all there just last week in China with the president meeting with Xi. You're right. I think that could be the next major controversy because of those chips. That TSMC technology is unique to Taiwan, and you can actually, according to Michael's book, you can copyright the silicon chip. So it is going to be an issue, and it is potentially rationable by certain nations, which is why I think the nations that have those may be under attack. But I'd be interested to hear what you think.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty interesting geopolitical way to look at it. And obviously we're talking about China. And, you know, Trump was in a position that I thought he was going to issue an executive order that have some safety mechanism before we issue the latest versions of these things. And then, you know, the powers that be, the Magnificent Seven, talked him out of it. And some of it was like China will get ahead of us, or Russia, or whomever. That gentleman, you know, he didn't so much ask a question, but described about galleries in terms of showing art. I know Cape Cod Museum of Art is planning an AI-only art exhibition in a year or two because they talked to me a little bit about it. I mean, that's transparency. The difficult part, Eduardo, is that the federal government issued an order that no state government can regulate AI. So, I mean, we may be able to regulate, you know, the manufacture or the development of data centers, but, you know, Governor Healy can't touch anything AI because the feds say they've taken control over it, and they've done nothing. I mean, zero. Absolutely nothing. Yeah, no, that doesn't help us. But yeah, maybe there's administrative change that we'll have folks to do it. But the genie gets out of the bottle. Tough to put the genie back in. And the genie's out of the bottle. Yes.
I too wanted to say thank you for taking the time to ask your students to do it on Zoom so that you had that. That's most massive time consuming. You might tell your daughter she might do that with admissions. Like
Yeah.
They're all going to show up on Friday, April 6th and write your essay.
Yeah. Not a bad idea.
My question is disclosure. You said that should be paramount in the law. Mm-hmm. Would that be across the board? I was just thinking, like, I was updating my certifications. So I signed up for online courses, and the first 2 I took, there was no bibliography. So every red light was going off in my head. Because there was arguments I had with some of the data they were giving me. And and I wanted to argue with somebody, you know? So there was no bibliography for me to check, find the abstracts, the study, research. So when I got all my money back because I called the people who were doing this and said, by the way, I need a bibliography because I disagree with some of the that you're putting in these courses. They couldn't give it to me, so I said, asked, is this AI generated? They were afraid, absolutely afraid to tell me that.
They told you without telling.
They sure did, and they refunded every penny. So I'm thinking it's right across the board. What if you called a bank, and it's a big bank, and your pension is there, and you are the person supervising that pension? $300 million, okay? And AI is generating to you, the folks that are investing this. Would that be a disclosure they'd have to give you? By the way, this is AI generated. Is this going to be a prosecutor?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm just saying. So, you know, when you have an advisor in the bank, it's usually several with big pension funds, because you look at where your pension funds are and where they're invested. You know, and I'm thinking in my head, banks are probably going to start using AI for large investments, if not already.
Yeah. ChatGPT has a version of that you give them access to all your financial accounts and where your Social Security is deposited, etc. And they will help you manage it and help you make the kind of decisions that you've talked about. But keep this in mind. If you're dealing with a registered investment advisor, they have a fiduciary duty, so they can't pass that off to AI. But that's probably just a matter of time. Let me tell you a personal thing. I follow Jensen Huang, who is the chairman of NVIDIA. Smart guy, interesting history too, and came to America young and. Kentucky, he and his brother were thrown in some almost penitentiary type school in Kentucky when he was like 10 and rose from there to Stanford, etc. And NVIDIA makes investments in assets, i.e. other corporations that he thinks can help improve what they do in terms of designing chips and things of that sort. So for instance, they bought a good percentage of CoreWeave not long ago. So I actually researched all the companies that Jensen Huang has recommended and then followed how that stock has done. I just did this 3 days ago. I then gave that information to Anthropic and I said, would you predict, because they predictive models, the next companies or industries that you think NVIDIA will acquire? And it gave me in different categories, and I would say maybe 50% were perhaps. The other 50% didn't seemingly have anything to do. So that would be hallucinating. But they got 50% that I started looking at, and I said, okay, I see where Jensen might have an interest in what these folks do. So yeah, it's probably not far from what you're doing, but again, there's got to be disclosure.
And over a year, I think 60 Minutes did a story on AI, and they asked, I don't know which AI, they asked, tell us what is inflation? I think was the question.
Yeah.
It was an essay with footnotes at the end, and then the footnotes cited papers that never existed. Some of them. Yeah. They don't make stuff up. You can ask to see citations though, if you really want, and then you can double check. Denise.
I'm interested to know, like, as a licensed broker, you're a licensed lawyer, medical doctor's license. We're all bound by that license, so we can't say at the end of a conversation with a client, just don't rely on the information we give you.
Yeah.
But yet, GBT chat does that, and they, as you said, they get their information from everywhere else. So as a broker or a lawyer or a doctor, you're responsible to go out and get the correct information. And just again, an example, just the other day, I was pretending as a buyer, and I wanted to know, like, was this a good price? And it was so wrong. It told me, first of all, I said, do an investment analogy, you know, how much if I rented seasonal, if I rented full-time, with the taxes, blah, blah. And it came back and it gave me a number, and then it gave me an interest rate. I mean, it gave me all this information about as a buyer, I would just love. And then I was looking at it, and it said the house has just been reduced, which it gave emotional stuff, which shows that they're, you know, sellers are probably anxious to sell and blah, 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 and it's been listed, and it gave me all that kind of real estate information, and then it had the wrong price of the house. It never asked me the price of the house, I just gave the address. So it did all this stuff and all this work, which I could have relied on that as a buyer and made a decision to purchase that home, which was not correct. But they're off the hook because it says GPT chat makes mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
But so people who will make major decisions, legal, medical,
Sure.
you know, purchasing a home, is that going to be like kind of like the whole scam thing? Like you find out later that you just lost $25,000, or you know, how is it?
We call that malpractice. Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting because in the beginning, none of the, you know, ChatGPT didn't say anything about making mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's all changed. Love?
All they have to do though, right? They just have to say.
Yeah.
Oh, I think I was gonna just sort of add a little bit about moving far corner here, kind of the beginning about like all this fear, justifiably so. And I think being here and becoming more educated, that is one of the tools that we need to keep talking. We also need to just literally stay connected, stay in touch, have the human certified stamp. We're energetic beings made up of atoms and molecules. The machine is not. And as much as we can truly just stay, I just want to leave with I just want to sort of give that. I mean, there's the balance between the promise. There is wonderful things that the machine can do and really help maybe advance some medical technology. I mean, I think in the medical field, that might be the best way that it can serve us. Sticking together, Michael, you've said that, and it's about working together and sticking together and human to human and talking and going back to the old traditions of oral traditions, right? Okay, it may take that. It may take the fact that we got to go back to actually talking to one another. That would be a good thing for students to actually learn how to have eye contact again and how to have, and we may just have to go back to some of those. So I think that promise, the peril versus the promise, and finding the balance between it, but don't, you know, staying connected as human beings is what is going to be the best thing that we can do amidst all this, because we don't have control over all these high techs, and it is frustrating and despairing, and we could just throw our hands up and say, forget it. And some of that's all going to keep going on, but what we can control is what we can control between one another.
Yeah.
Christina Plant.
That's my wife, I don't know. And I want to thank the library director who's back there, or executive director, whatever your appropriate title is, for allowing us to have this conversation in this space, which I think, and so many of your friends and past friends, soon to be friends, hopefully. And I'm just a resource. I don't have all the answers. I'm pretty good at asking questions. So, you know, don't hesitate to get a hold of me. I don't answer anything, but my wife does, so.
You know, I'll mention, just because the positive, I agree, like staying positive is key. These moments here is so key, spending time with people. And in the last podcast episode, I interviewed Emma Fillion from After Hours. And she's like, I don't know how to advertise to my generation because most of them aren't using social media. So Gen Z is sort of figuring this out, and they're almost leading in that they're not doing the technology thing, right? So that's an interesting move. So good, but also there is upside. Medical, totally agree. And not to be like all doom and gloom, because it can be kind of scary, but I agree with you 100%. And that was sort of one of the last, what gives you hope moving forward with this?
Us, hope, asking intelligent questions, inquiring, questioning the opinion leaders, the policy leaders. If you don't want to buy, SpaceX when it comes public, then don't buy SpaceX, and just continue to have conversations and demand, if you're at some gallery, is this real? Our stuff is real. And if it's not real, it should be someplace else.
Thank you for it. I mean, there was two things that just like hit me like a brick. Disclosure should be paramount in laws, and truthfulness in advertising. Those two are like such big solutions for me.
Yeah.
In my opinion, that would help me so much if I had that available all the time.
Well,
Not gonna happen, huh?
yeah. Well, no, and again, there is a lot of promise, and I don't mean to dismiss any of that, but Pope Leo XIV said ethics and morality, he's realized, are not enough. It really takes us, it takes people, it takes government to demand some changes. It's all well and good to be well intended, but we have to put it into action in different ways. And hey, there are folks in here who have kids that work in tech. And having those kinds of conversations is important. And because they're the change makers. And part of our goal is to help educate folks. It's our society, a better community, a better way of life, a better democracy.
You've got a question here.
Yeah.
And I also, in a way, I feel like this is a ray of hope. And you were talking about a lot of this has just emerged over the past couple of years.
2 years, yeah.
Could there be a worse time for our society, especially because of who's president right now in the United States? Because I won't be political, because I think it is true that lack of regulation or encouraging the wealthiest among us to profit. Could there be a worse time for it to come into more widespread use? Because I do think there is a place for government, and hope that in the future that will the government will take a bigger role in helping to solve some of the issues that are around the bad parts.
Correct, yeah. No, I don't disagree with that. No, we hope so. I know my wife's here. We do have books if you're interested. You don't have to buy a book, but if you'd like to buy a book, and that'd be good too. Joan, we want to thank you. You were terrific.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Okay, that was the Snow Library presentation that Michael Jones gave on May 26th. Now we're going to go to the May 7th taproom conversation, which had, again, a live audience. It was loud in there, so really different audio quality on this, but please enjoy.
Michael Jones!
Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Joan and Nina, for the introduction. Just in case, there's a running group outside that's going to start in a couple minutes, just in case you don't want to hear the rest of the conversation. Let me just say a little bit about the genesis of the book. My editor asked me a couple years ago if I would be interested in writing a book about artificial intelligence and what it means for artists and the creative process. And for those that know me, most of my work and research and prior book publishing is all kind of linear. It's about sports law or entertainment law or intellectual property law, and this is a much broader subject. So I said, I'll do it on one condition, and that is that if I walk into an airport bookstore, I'll find the book. He said, we'll make it happen. He retired 4 months later, and it does not happen. Anyway, we're working on it. I'm not a computational scientist at all. I read a lot about computational science, about computer. I read a lot about philosophy, Immanuel Kant. I read a lot about art history. I read a total of 43 different books. I had the opportunity to talk and meet with the head of Google Search, some really bright people out of Harvard in terms of how the mind works and how our minds work are different from that of AI. And I've got a chart up here, we'll come back to it in a minute, just because I think it's important we all share the same sort of language. To give you an idea, a couple of years ago we had a salon and we had to sort of explain what ChatGPT was. And we had to show images and look at bias and hallucinations. We're way beyond that. We're what we call almost artificial general intelligence or agentic AI, which we'll chat about. And I think the concern just from friends and family talking about AI is almost the bigger picture, which we can get to. To give you an idea of the bigger picture, Elon Musk controls 2.7% of the entire U.S. gross national product. Gross national product is the value of all the products and services we create in any year. Elon Musk controls 2.7%. If you look at the 7 major, more or less, tech companies, Google, Meta, Microsoft, companies like that, Amazon certainly fits into it. Those companies collectively are more than 10% of the entire global value of stock market, of publicly traded companies. Those 7 companies are worth more than 10% overall. And one more global macro statistics, that on a global basis, the value of all these tech companies and what they call hyperscalers. So hyperscalers are something we used to call companies that would create data centers and had cloud. They comprise 23% of the global economy now, and that's from the World Bank and an International Monetary Federation. So we're looking at a handful of companies that literally control our ability to communicate, who we communicate with, and how we communicate. Okay, Genesis of my book. My editor from Bloomsbury says, will you write the book? I said, yes. Okay. So I start with, the book begins a little bit with how technology has always impacted the creative process. And something as simple as a paint tube. So before we had paint tubes, and paint tubes were invented in 1841. If you were an artist, we have lots of people that are artists here that dabble in pastels and watercolors and acrylics and oils. You had to find your minerals, cobalt, ochre, whatever it was. You had to get a stone and you had to smash those minerals into a powder. You then needed to add a binder. A binder was either an egg yolk or linseed oil. Then you had to store it in a pig's bladder. That is a lot. Technology made it easy. Made it easier for artists and common folk to buy a paint tube and not just paint indoors, but paint outdoors. And so this was happening at the time of the Renaissance, and then later on Cubism and all the other different forms that all of us are able to take advantage of. But there's one other aspect to this, and it's important to keep in mind. And that is, it takes a paintbrush, unless you're Jackson Pollock and you throw it on the ground. This paintbrush is super important from a legal perspective because it's the human hand. And our copyright office says you cannot copyright anything unless it involves the human hand. It has to also be original. Our copyright office has not allowed any AI-generated work to be copyrighted because it lacks the human hand. So the paintbrush in the hand allows whatever I do, whatever you do, to have a copyrighted work. Okay, that was 1841. Let's now move to 1888. George Eastman, Rochester, New York, developed the Kodak camera. This is a Brownie. Kodak camera. 1900s. At the time, artists and the creative community said, art as we know it is over. Because a camera can capture something so fast on film that artists, especially portrait artists, take a long time. And this technology, many folks in the creative sphere said it is the end of art as we know. But what happened? Well, we went from artists just doing portraits to now doing landscapes. And realizing that maybe I could use the camera to take an image of what I saw outdoors, have the film developed, and then work off that. So this, while a technological change initially was an act of peril for the artist community, eventually photography became an art form in its own, and the artists continued to do their work. We know that little camera that required film in a developing room then became morphed into what we call a digital camera, and where instead of using film, it became arithmetic. It just put everything into a 1 and a 0. And it used better lighting techniques to be able to absorb it. That was the year 2000, digital camera. 2010, Steve Jobs. Another technological change. And it's amazing what we can do with this. And whether you know it or not, there is a lot of AI that all of you have been using a long time, and you've not been afraid yet. And think about the computational power of this. And it's got all kind of chips. It's got these kind of chips. It's got other chips. It's got central processing unit chips. It's got parallel processing chips that Ben and I talked about just a couple of minutes ago that allow multiple functions. It's got a GPS, registers your heart rate, right? You can download apps. You can take photographs. It's a multitude of uses. Technological change hasn't destroyed us. We've learned to work with it. Now, just so we can understand, there is a huge difference between the way our brain works and the way AI works. Our brain is full of neurons. So we take in sensory experiences. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what distinguishes us from a computer. Because we have feelings. Computational science, as we get out of the AI, just gives you answers. It doesn't give you meaning. It doesn't give you intent. It looks good. And all of you have heard of Turing, Alan Turing, famous mathematician. He was of the belief that if an AI machine could produce something that resembles what humans produce, that machine was intelligent. That's not my definition of intelligence or creativity. Ada Lovelace, who was a mathematician way before Turing, said, no, no, no. Something is intelligent if it's original, if it's authentic. An AI can replicate, and it replicates through algorithmic models. It looks at probabilities. It gives certain weights. That's how it's trained. When we talked about AI a couple years ago, that's all it did. It was a large language model. It was a simple this, where you give it a prompt, and it would weigh whether or not I should make that puppy a certain color, 4 legs, 3 legs. Does it hear well? Does it smell well? And these are called tokens. It gives certain weight to that. And as these machines practice more and more, as all of us collectively ask to get more and more, it gets better at it. And if you look at some of the ChatGPT images, 4 or 5 years ago, you had 5-legged cats, donkeys with no ears. It was crazy. But now it's really, really good. It's really good in text, and it's really good in images. But keep in mind, it's just a mathematical formula. That's all it is. It's been programmed. That's all it is. It doesn't have meaning, doesn't have intent, doesn't have feeling. It doesn't cry. It doesn't know what it's like to lose a parent or a child or a loved one. It doesn't know any of that. But it gives you output that makes you feel as though it does. And good, bad, or indifferent, we use the same words. We're talking about what AI produces as what the human experience and human component is, which I think adds to some of the problem. Now, we're at a whole nother level because we went from this simple little large language model, AI, that all of you use, to now what's called agentic AI. In agentic AI, if there's any part of AI that we need to worry about, it's this part. To give you an example, OpenAI now has ChatGPT 5. ChatGPT 5 was written by ChatGPT 4. There was no human element involved. I'll say it again. ChatGPT 5 was written by ChatGPT 4. No human element. And these agentic AIs, which we all hear about, take an incredible amount of energy. Over here, we have a lot of people that are involved in energy here. These data centers are beyond comprehension, the amount of energy. Elon Musk and others are thinking about, whenever he does a SpaceX, that to launch the SpaceX and somehow create data centers working off solar energy. I don't care what the politicians tell you about energy, and don't worry about it. Amazon Web is going to pay for their own energy. There's only a limited amount of energy. And a lot of folks in here don't want us to use fossil fuels anymore. And even though they may develop it and use it for theirs, it just takes away from us. So energy is a large component of this. Land use is a large component. All these data centers, and the amount of square footage, these things are larger than probably anything any of us have ever seen. They all have to be cooled because computational power takes energy and it gives off energy. They all have to be cooled. And people ask me, if you wanted to end AI, how would you do it? I would say cut off the water supply, and then they're done. However, agentic AI is now starting to do things on its own without any prompts. And that's the potential danger. The big question at the end of the day is, how much are we willing to give up? How much of us? How much of our control? And I know so many of you from pickleball, and many of you play Mahjong and the Orleans Yacht Club, and all. That's the stuff we have to hold on to. We can't lose control. We can't let Elon Musk and that crowd control who we are and how we do it. What can we do about it? Think back to the robber barons, the Gilded Age, when we had the Carnegies and the Rockefellers and the Mellons. All those folks. We regulated them. We broke up Standard Oil. We broke up the steel industry. There are no boundaries. There are no brakes to AI. An example that some of you heard before and I use in my book is that when the steam engine became popular and the Brits introduced a steam engine for their train, they wanted to showcase it to members of parliament. Members of parliament stood on the railroad track with members of the public. They watched the train came, and many of them got run over and were killed because the train didn't have brakes. That's where we're at today. This does not have any brakes. And we as a collective society have to somehow talk to the people that make the rules and put brakes. I've had the opportunity as well to be able to communicate with some of these folks and express with them my concerns. We've gone back and forth on this, but that's sort of what we have to do as members of the public. You can't give up your creative impulse. It's a wonderful tool. We all use it in certain ways. There needs to be transparency. Another example, Monday, the Screen Actors Guild reached a labor agreement with the streaming services. That's Amazon Prime, that's Netflix, etc., Disney Plus. And the deal is they cannot use any deep fakes and voice impersonations of any SAG actor without consent, transparency, and payment. That's what we need. We need all of that. Because unfortunately, when we were at this stage, the large language models, all that data got scrapped. All that data got pulled before anybody told us. These systems know everything about every picture you put on Instagram, every text you've said, they have that data. They have all of it because nobody put any brakes and nobody respected the privacy. And then depending on your perspective of government, you have to be worried about surveillance. Do they control it? And then what are they able to do? The Chinese use AI all the time. If we were in China, you would be rated on how good a citizen you are. You'd be rated about how positive your text messages or your FaceTime messages were with your friends and family. And if you get a low rating, instead of paying a 6.5% interest rate, you pay a 12.5% interest rate. That's how they try to modify your behavior. So it's a world with a lot of promise. We're well into it. You know, this train is not stopping. We just need to learn to put some control mechanisms on. So it's got promise and it has perils. And the book is about that. You know, it starts from how technology has impacted all of us, especially in the creative, and then it works with some of the legal issues, the privacy issues, and then ultimately, what does it mean to be human? And you know, all the experts that I talk to that deal with the mind and the mind-body relationship said so much of what comes out that's creative comes out by mind wandering. Comes out in our sleep, when we relax, when we're not attending some detail. That's where the creative impulse comes from. And that's where meaning comes from. And so we all have to work together, you know, to continue to create meaning in our lives, care about this stuff, and don't ignore what's happening here. I'm sure many of you have questions or thoughts. Some of you, anyone to chat? So that's, you know, that's kind of where we're at. Yeah. This is a guy with a mic. I went to some citizens forum with him, and he made sure everybody had the mic.
So how will this affect visual arts versus musical arts versus language arts compared to what it's doing to everything else that we do?
So my first cousin went to Duke University and wanted to get in the music business. And he didn't go to Nashville, I think he went to Virginia, and he was given a little band. The band nobody knew the band was called Bare Naked Ladies. And he was their agent manager for 30 years, and then he went out on his own. And he's German, and he represents a lot of DJs in Europe. He also represents Andrew Lloyd Webber. Andrew Lloyd Webber's family has wanted to get more into the digital space. So my cousin Eric and I, because of his interest in music and knowledge, I said, Eric, have you worked with AI? He said, no. I said, do you want to do an experiment? He said, yeah. Why don't you take one of the albums of one of your bands in Europe, and I'll tell you which AI machine to put it on. I think it was Midjourney or one of those, and then see what happens. So what they did, he had the band present, the band consented, they put the latest album of the band in an AI and said, create a duplicate album that sounds like. Within minutes, it came out, and the band got up and said, we are done. It's over. That sounds like us. You know, and in the absence of transparency, yeah, we don't know the difference. Yeah, David.
Why do so many people in positions of influence seem so reluctant to instill any regulations at the moment?
I don't know what everybody thinks about Elon Musk, but I will say that Elon Musk is literally the only one that tried to do that. But he couldn't get anybody else. He couldn't get Peter Thiel from Palantir, and he couldn't get Altman. And you know, Musk and Altman are in the middle of a contract dispute, to put it mildly. None of these people like each other, and it's our capitalistic system, you know, at play here. So it just becomes more and more competitive, and clearly we have an administration that seems reluctant to do anything. I will say, because we have some lawyers in here, there have been a couple of cases of where ChatGPT has encouraged kids to commit suicide, or how to do a mass murder and get public attention. The Wall Street Journal had a huge piece a couple of days ago on that. And there was a lawsuit in California. It was a state court case, wasn't a federal case, where ChatGPT was held liable, or maybe Google and ChatGPT were held liable. There were a couple. It wasn't a large sum of money, but it was the first verdict we've had. The problem is, again, back to regulation. We have something called Section 230 that gives immunity to all websites and AI machines as we know them from any liability. So those rules have to be changed. The interesting thing about that case is they argued it under a products liability theory. They basically used what the public used against cigarette manufacturers, that they knew it was unsafe and continued to produce it. There's plenty of literature and plenty of whistleblowers in all these AI systems that will tell you these systems are unsafe for kids, especially young women, who are more prone to some of the demons that can occur.
There is a novel that was written by Michael Connolly on that very subject. AI was sued in product liability in a civil case. The name of the book is called The Proving Ground. You as a judge know what the proving ground is. It's the area in front of the bench and the jury where the case is proven. It's a wonderful book. If you're interested in hearing something that is happening now, it's called The Proving Ground by Michael Connolly.
This comes from a retired Bentley University law professor, yes.
So what you've sort of presented is a level of hope and a level of ownership on the part of the public to harness before the genie is completely out of the bottle. It seems to me that this is the time of also a perfect storm, where our society, no matter where you sit on the political spectrum, is clearly at its most dysfunctional. The courts seem to be more vulnerable, either from those who are willing to accept judgments or those that will just ignore judgments of the court. What kind of peril do you see within the next 10 years? Because the genie's only going to get more out of the bottle every day and every chat GPT version that reiterates itself.
There's not one answer to the question, but I think if you look maybe what I call lanes. So if you have a child that just graduated college, she's probably worried. There's no question there's going to be job loss. And before this talk, I looked at a whole bunch of estimates. Goldman Sachs said, 30% of all professional jobs won't be in existence by 2030. I'm not sure anybody can predict. But I think we all know in certain fields. I still teach. I have a lot of physics majors and computational science that, believe it or not, take this course. And they say, what's the point of learning how to code? I've loved to code. I spent 4 years doing it. And every one of these systems, Sam Altman has gone on record. He can't code as well as OpenAI can code. So certainly from an industrial labor perspective, that becomes an issue. There are certain folks, again, we'll go back to Elon Musk, that believes there'll be so many people out of work that we need to basically have a universal income for everybody and eliminate taxes for individuals and increase the taxes for these corporations that pay very little taxes, especially in a percentage of their income. It's very, very small. And Elon Musk somehow thinks that people will find meaning even without work. And maybe it's just our culture that most of us find meaning in work, where we get rewarded if you do well. And all of a sudden, if we're creating a society where all we have to do, in fact, George Eastman, when he developed the Kodak, the brand lingo was, you push the button, we'll do the rest. Is that where we want to land with AI? We just push the button and AI does the rest. Yes, Gloria. Sorry, I gotta use a different one.
Thank you. Michael, you are a college professor. I know you deal with a lot of grad students and people that are, pursuing law degrees. But you also deal with people that have grown up in the digital age for the past 20 years, right? And are sort of complacent. Is your feeling that these students are going to rise up and rebel? or are they going to just sit back and watch what's going to happen? Because that's interesting as a professor. You're a professor, so I'm interested in your reaction to that.
Yeah. So Gloria is a professor at Wentworth and teaches English and poetry, and a good friend of Christine. And Gloria and I have talked about this a little bit. Pete's going to move me over. So here's what I do now. Because I don't ask essay discussion questions. I try not to, because it's too easy. And to be honest with you, there was a point, because I've used this stuff for so long, that I could tell when a college kid did that. But now, it's too good. So here's what I do. I give oral midterm exams and finals. You're gonna get 10 or 15 minutes, and you're gonna tell me whatever you know about copyright law and the Warhol decision. That's how I get around it. I think Gloria's real point is, how do we encourage people to continue to think critically? That's the tough part. And especially in a world where people don't read and their attention span. I have to use YouTube videos to get a point across, because I know if I tell them to read 2 chapters, nobody's going to read 2 chapters. They're going to look for somebody else to provide the information. Hey, but don't laugh, because a lot of you don't read. You listen to audiobooks, right? So that's... I will say that 2 of these students had offers from NVIDIA. NVIDIA, designs the chips, and Taiwan Semiconductor manufactures them. And some of this is political, because Taiwan Semiconductor is in Taiwan, and obviously there's a lot of geopolitical stuff between mainland China and Taiwan. And if Taiwan Semiconductor goes under, this industry is in trouble. They're really, really good at this. There's a new company. I see Tom, and I think IPO. He's thinking that IPO, but I'm thinking initial public offering. There's a company called Cerebas, Cerebas, that claims to do what Taiwan Semiconductor can do, and does it in this country. And if you're interested, they're going public later this month. So I think, Gloria, to answer the question, you have to work really hard to make them think critically. And let me go back to the 2 kids in the video. One of them worked 7 months for NVIDIA last year, and worked under a whole bunch of senior engineers. And to a T, every one of them said, my best thinking takes place when I have a pad of paper and a pen and I start to doodle and stuff. Don't rely upon this. This is NVIDIA telling their young employee to be. The other woman who received an offer in NVIDIA, her offer got pulled like 3 weeks ago, because we don't need so many folks that do what you're trained to do. And I said, what are you going to do now? And she said, I'm not sure, grad school, whatever it might be. But certainly job loss in certain areas and certain education, you've got to work at it in terms of somehow finding a means to make sure that they can absorb the material and question the material, the validity of it. Obviously, deep fakes are a huge problem. Used to be funny, now it's not so funny. And Steve referenced when I was a judge. When I was a judge, people would take a picture of something. If somebody damaged my driveway, and I'd look at the picture and I said, okay, I guess that's reality. And then the only class I ever dropped in my entire life was a class on photoshopping, because it scared me. I said, you can alter reality. So this is a real case with a driveway. Somebody said somebody had some huge truck and cracked the driveway. And as a judge, I can't go out alone. I have to have security with me. So I'm with security with me. And we couldn't find the crack. We thought we must be in the wrong driveway. So I called all the parties back, and I said, I'm just going to ask you one question. Did you Photoshop this? He said, yeah. Like it was nothing. It's like lying to the court. That's like perjury. People go to jail for that. He didn't think anything was wrong with it. Nope. That was his distorted reality. He wanted me to buy into that reality. So there's another place we need to be cautious. Yes. This will be the toughest question of the day.
First, I think what everyone wants to know, are you going to have an audio book so us listeners could listen?
Only if the book club promises to use.
Okay. So, as you pointed out, I mean, we've been innovative since the beginning of time. We have adjusted to that. As you said, we've adjusted to phones, we've adjusted. It sounds like regulations are the way to put on the brakes. Is there anything else? Because I believe we could adjust, but it's happening so fast. I mean, as soon as you write the book, it becomes obsolete because there's just like, there's so many more chapters to add. And in your experience, in your readings, in your talks with others, I mean, I know we've had conversations, but I guess, could you share with others anything other than regulations that can help put on the brakes?
I think just, society's insistence that we just have more
public awareness.
Yeah, public awareness, things like this, that we have more transparency. I've noticed that on some of the ads on, whatever, cable or streaming, whatever, they're now saying AI assisted. I think, but it's easy to say, but those folks that are in unions, they have stronger labor protection. We don't have a privacy union here. We don't have an anti-surveillance union here. So we're left on our own devices. And, in a small way, books like this. Again, I think I mentioned to you, I got to chat with the head of Google Search. We actually had a conference together. But there's a guy, I forget his name, he just wrote a book on Demis Habbissus. If you don't know who he is, he's a computational science that won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his work on proteins. Brilliant guy. Wrote the code to have AI beat the Chinese game of Go, which is impossible to beat. Absolutely brilliant guy. So it's a biography in his book, and the gentleman who wrote the book, his sense of creativity is Turing's test. And I wrote him, I emailed him, and I said, no, here are my thoughts on this book. And there's a woman by the name of Margaret Bowden who identifies different types of creativity. Expository creativity is basically when you take something that exists and you reframe it or you replicate it. 97% of all the creativity in the world is expository. AI does that. I'll check that. They're great at expository credit. The transformative creativity, is only 3% of all creativity. And that's us. When we work on our stuff and we do something, we innovate in a manner that nobody has done before. And we do it because we rely upon the human condition. We rely upon our relationships, the funny things that happen in pickle court, what somebody says or does. Tom goes to Milan and goes to a fashion show, and I said, you know what? I think I can create something. I think I can do a better job than that. We all build upon the works of others, admittedly. We all build. But when you do something that's more authentic, that's more original, that communicates something, that speaks to us in a manner we've not been spoken to, that's my definition of creativity. And that's only 3% of the work that all of us does. But it's the most important 3%. Because that's where change occurs and that's where innovation. The other 97% is just replicating what's already been done and already been said.
Kind of to that point, a lot of conversations have been happening around the fact that the jobs that are getting done by AI are low-level, mid-level jobs, and that if those are being taken away from people, then people aren't growing into the higher level, more, I guess, human-driven jobs. How does that ladder falling apart? Where does that land?
Nobody really knows the answer. Let me just tell you, law firms, the number of law firms that have eliminated paralegals is off the chart. If you haven't, put a contract in, and I don't care what it is, and there are disclaimers now. We're not a law firm, but boy, they can do a pretty good job drafting a simple will, contracts, and purchase and sale agreements, and on and on and on. You don't need a paralegal. Now, you still need somebody to meet with a client and hold their hand and talk to them about what are your needs and how do we solve that. Now, you're absolutely right. All those mid-level jobs in a sense, they're going to disappear. Nobody knows exactly how many and where, but I think we all can see it.
Thank you. I may be the senior person here. No, my husband is. But I'm but a child. But I taught for many years, and I taught nursing in a baccalaureate program. I went to graduate school endlessly. And the one thing that I still think holds true is when you are submitting something, you're on the receiving end of the submissions. If you do not check sources, legal stuff is rife with this, that if you don't, did that brief actually exist, or is it a fabrication? So one of the things that I think we have to remember is that we must stick to the old, in the one instance here, that you stick to the old tried and true. You research, you go back. Somebody, and many of you write poetry, or at least you're involved with poetry and prose writing. And when you see a line of poetry that's purported to be by, let's say, Yeats, and something about it isn't quite right, and one of the things is looking at punctuation. Punctuation is everything in poetry. So when AI is generating this stuff, the punctuation for a lot of it doesn't exist. And that's the thing that I think we have to keep remembering, that there are basics, that we've all got to remember the stuff we learned in 5th grade. Check your spelling, check your spelling, check your spelling. Pronunciation. I hear more mispronounced words generated by AI than almost anything. It's comical. Sometimes there'll be 3 words mispronounced in a sentence. So it's the kind of thing where if we get sloppy about it, and if we let our students get sloppy about it, then it's on us. It's totally on us, because your biography of the development of technology and how we've adjusted to it, each time we've had to relearn new things, or learn new things, but remember the old. And I think that's the thing we do have to keep in mind. And that's what'll keep us, at least, from going over the edge. And the last thing I would like to say is that I've watched 3 of my children be out of jobs because of AI or the new technologies. One of them was a paralegal in California, all gone. One of them did voiceovers and audio books, all gone. So you have, the third one's, she reinvents herself all the time, and so she's fine. One of the things that, it's easy to get discouraged, and I think you have to keep learning. This book will help me a lot, and then keep remembering you have a good foundation, you have the basics, keep at it.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that I didn't mention as an educator that I do, I've redone my syllabus, for instance, and now I have them, this is how I want you to use AI. And you're absolutely right about primary sources and things of that sort. And it's our responsibility to teach them about that, because to them, Wikipedia is as good a source as anything. And, we know that has its limitations. Yeah, David, you had a question again?
It seems like you're painting a world as though the only people that are going to be able to hang on are the people that are sort of more creative and are one step ahead of AI, and everybody else is going to be driving packages around and working in elder care. I mean, I'm having trouble grasping what's going to be left for the average smart person who did fine for the last 40 years, and particularly our kids who might have the greatest educations and qualifications, but maybe they're a little less creative of that 3%. What's everybody going to do?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I don't want to dim the lights anymore for you, but we have robots, David, that can do home health care, that can take care of elderly. So Deb's a great provider, but maybe, and we may have driverless Amazon trucks soon too. So we have all that. Yeah, and we have drones. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts? And yeah.
It's so short it doesn't merit a mic. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future?
Yeah. I think that Kate Cotter quoted me as, "This is an existential threat," and it is to some degree, unless we're not proactive. So me personally, because I'm not fully in it, but I'm in it probably more than most of folks. I can see my way through it, and I can see the barriers. But I also play a different game. I'm not on social media. Good luck trying to text me, because I'm probably not going to answer you. So we all have different ways of handling this. And I will say, this book is in the hands of a lot of members of Congress, some of our state reps that serve on AI committees. So I'm trying to be proactive, like, hey, there are resources, there are questions to be asked. We don't have all the answers, but we can help you ask the better question.
Well, in terms of the perfect storm, I left out social media in my question before. Yeah. 6 months ago, the average person had no idea what a data center is. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now they are sort of a unifying issue across the spectrum of politics, and that's because of social media. Mm-hmm. Are you optimistic or are you pessimistic?
No. I'm generally optimistic. But let's just talk about social media. So Australia passed a law that just became effective a couple months ago, limiting the 16 and under use. Now there's all kind of issues. How do you determine the age of it? And it's primarily targeted to helping young women who get suckered into that sphere and can't see their way out. And the algorithms just generate more sadness and depression and lack of hope. And that's regulation. And there are bills in Congress in this country, and I think there's a fair amount of support, Democratic and Republican. And all it takes is Musk and Altman and Peter Thiel and the others to say, yeah, we need to do something. And because remember, the Gilded Age, the robber barons, we did something. The other thing, and this is something Joan and I chatted about the other day, if you go back to the era of Carnegie, I grew up in Appalachia, Western Pennsylvania, and what Andrew Carnegie did was, to all the poor communities, he built a library and a gymnasium and a swimming pool. And as a young kid with a little bit of athletic ability, I would go use the library and swim in the pool, thanks to Carnegie. Carnegie actually wrote an article about the obligation of the wealthy to help the less wealthy for education purposes so they can thrive in this economy and just not that level. Certainly the Rockefellers did the same. John D. Rockefeller, universities, medical centers, etc., Mellon libraries, or Morgan rather libraries, the Mellon's finance. So, we can put that kind of social media pressure on those folks, as you have a bigger responsibility to give back. You have to let us buy into and be a part of this movement. It just can't be you and your venture capital SoftBank friends. It's got to be us. So, all right. Nina? Yeah, okay, we're done. Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Michael. I think we're all a little wiser, a little sadder, a little more optimistic.
I gotta say, that was a really fun time. That's a great venue, the Tap Room in Orleans. All right, next we have the presentation, really kind of an interview, back and forth conversation with the audience, with Michael and myself at the Citizens Forum, Orleans Citizens Forum at the Orleans Historical Society, June 2025.
AI wants to please you, which can be a problem, because when you get to know it and you almost become personalized with it, it'll say things that it, or do things that it thinks you want done, even though you didn't ask it to do it. And that, you have to be very careful about that relationship. So it's tested against different faces, and then the predictive element is, now that it's trained, can it recognize a particular face? And you may all know this, but you go to a major concert or a major sporting event, there's facial recognition as you enter. And my experience, some of you know I was a judge for a lot of years, is that law enforcement would use it. Somebody with a felony, a weapons charge, a domestic violence charge, and that's how facial recognition was used initially, certainly by law enforcement. Okay, Nate, is there one more to this, or is that the last? Okay, and there's the energy. Roger, this slide is for you. That's the energy model. Okay, so Clark.
Well, you had a nice introduction. What's in that drink? No, I would say I'll speak louder so that you can use that, because I don't think these are going through here. So,
okay.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Great introduction already to Michael Judge Jones. I know him as Judge. We've done one podcast about AI in the past, but this is really about all the new discoveries that you've made as you're writing this new book. And this is going to be live on the podcast, so appreciate everyone coming to see Michael Judge Jones. And his newest book, What Art Is Now, Creativity in the Age of AI, unpacks one of the biggest questions of our time. What happens when machines start to create? The book is being published by Bloomsbury and should be available later this year. Very excited. So Michael Jones was professor of law, better known to many as Judge. So let's just start with, what is AI?
Well, we kind of ran through what it is, but it's computational science. I know we have Ben here who's got a large background in there. It's really just a form of computational science that collects data, and that's a concern. And the concern is because nobody, frankly, asked your permission. However, if you're on Meta or Instagram or any of those, if you have bothered to look at the terms and conditions, that little small print that you've got to do 3 links, you're giving stuff up. I was a Fulbright specialist for India a couple years ago, teaching basically the sons and daughters of Supreme Court judges in India's intellectual property law, basically copyrights and trademarks. At least that's what I thought they wanted to learn. Till I learned all they wanted to know was about how they could get their cricket players to make money the way our NBA players make money. It took me like 2 weeks to figure out they didn't care about any of the other stuff. It was all about what we call publicity rights, naming rights. That's all they wanted. However, there was one woman in there whose face was on billboards throughout India advertising a product. She had no idea how it got there. And it got there because of an Instagram photo that she had given permission without her knowledge to use. And her father was a Supreme Court judge in India and was absolutely livid. And so part of what they wanted to know is, well, how do we get that removed? So AI scrapes data. And there are major lawsuits, which we can get into, about trademark issues and copyright issues and things of that sort. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And Midjourney is getting sued right now for that very thing, which is one of many, many instances in the last 2 years of lawsuits that are major. And I believe this one involves Disney and a few others.
And Universal.
Yeah. So some major players that have a lot of sway are suing these AI art, programs. But before we talk about, it's in my last statement. So what is art? Before we can talk about copyright, what is really art in your professional opinion?
So one of the first books that I read related to this, and I do know a little bit about art, and I know a little bit about law. There was a Columbia University professor, named Arthur Donata, who was an art critic and also a professor of art history and philosophy, covered all kind of stuff. And he wrote a book called What is Art? Short little book based on a lot of lectures that he gave. And he talks about the history of art, ironically related to technology, which is the approach that I took. How has technology and innovation impacted what we consider to be art? And I just brought a couple of simple examples, but believe it or not, putting paint in a tube was a major innovation because you couldn't paint outdoors. You couldn't take your easel and your brushes in your tubes. And Nate, you want to show the first? So that's Monet water lilies. We were just with some of the grandkids at the Museum of Modern Arts and saw this, or one of the water lilies. Monet couldn't have done this without this. He's stuck in the studio. They were all stuck in a studio. So that's an example of how innovation allowed an artist to express himself or herself in a manner that one couldn't do just looking at a still life in a studio or a portrait. Because before, Monet and the Impressionists, for the most part, art was either about the Catholic Church or something had to be realistic. You couldn't even paint a peasant back in the day. Nobody would do that. You'd just paint royalty, you'd paint priests, you'd paint lawyers, judges, folks of that nature. But this opened up a whole new world, this little innovation. All right, Nate, next slide. Okay, here's the real image. This is, some of you know who Roland Sherman is because I've talked to him about it before. Roland at one point lived in Orleans. Roland Sherman, photojournalist, started out as a rock star on American Bandstand in the 1950s and attended Oberlin College. And one of his rich alums sent the entire junior class at Oberlin College to Austria. He buys a Leica camera, sort of like that, little camera, comes back, tells Dick Clark and Columbia Records, I'm going to be a photographer. Put the guitar down. Roland was a super attractive guy, crooner, they loved him. And he said, nope. Kennedy gets elected. He goes to Sergeant Shriver and says, I want to be a photojournalist. And they said, kid, we don't need you. We need doctors, nurses. You're none of that. But he refused to leave, came to the office every day. And then finally, Princess Beatrice came, who was in love with Sergeant Shriver, and asked to have her photograph taken with him. And Bill Moyers, who was the media guy for Sergeant Shriver, said, where's that kid with the camera? Which almost became the title of the book that my wife Christine and I did on Roland. All right, fast forward, Newport Folk Festival, a young kid nobody knows, 17, 18 years old, with a bullwhip around his neck, hanging around with a guitar, asked if he can play. Joan Baez sits next to him. Next thing you know, the last day of the Newport Folk Festival, who's the star? Not Peter, Paul, and Mary, not Pete Seeger, not Joan Baez, but Bob Dylan. And there is Roland taking all those images of Dylan and helping to make him a star because he shares these images. Dylan's in concert years later. Roland knows him. Roland's literally up on stage, takes this picture, and realizes, I've got something. goes to president of Columbia Records, or one of the vice presidents rather, and says one-time use. And this is a lesson Paul knows and others know. That, boy, you better get it right and you better have a pretty good lawyer. One-time use, this image. Paid him $250. This image has appeared more than 50 million times. Columbia Records immediately put it on the cover of Dylan's Greatest Hits. Roland won a Grammy for it. Did he get a royalty check? No. Now, we had opportunities to go after Bob Dylan, and Roland did not want me to go after Bob Dylan for copyright infringement because Dylan put it on the cover of his book. None of that was authorized. None of that was authorized. Okay, Nate, next. All right, so technology. Tube of paint, camera, 3D, digital, Adobe, something you talk about with me all the time.
And a lot of the artists hate Adobe
A lot of
because
the
of the AI.
Yeah.
And just on that point, Adobe now there's a lot of issues because their recent legal agreement said we have the rights to scrape all of your personal art and use it for our development of AI, which is another company that's in hot water. So to that point.
Yeah. This is done by a guy named Beeple, B-E-E-P-L-E. And if any of you know who Beeple is, he created NFT, which we call non-fungible token, which is like a digital form of art, tough to display, and sold it for, I don't know, $69 million. Yeah, $69 million. I don't know who would pay. All your NBA stars and Major League Baseball stars, they all have NFTs of their image in a digital stuff. So you literally need a digital projector, so to speak, to do it. And Beeple, this is some sci-fi thing he did for some Hollywood stuff. And Screen Actors Guild in Hollywood is another organization that's upset. Because, I'm going to ask Christine, what was the name of the guy that won the Academy Award for the Brutus or whatever? Aidan Broden. Aidan Broden's voice, after he won Best Actor, they announced that they used AI to make it sound like a more Hungarian accent. They did not disclose that before they awarded him the Best Actor. Yeah, exactly. Timothy Chalamet spent years, doing Dylan. Okay, Nate, what's next? All right, this is one of my favorite artists. Again, technology. This is Banksy. Banksy's a street artist. I think we now know who his name is, but for years nobody knew it. And Banksy, this is stencil and a little can of paint, spray paint. That can of paint, believe it or not, in the eyes of many, is art. That can of paint is another street artist who's a friend of Banksy called Mr. Brainwash. And that can of paint and stencil were used to create images like this. And so we're back to what is art? How does this speak to you? Is this girl feel lost? Or does she feel hopeful? And that's what Banksy wants us to think. What is she thinking? And what are you feeling when you see this image? But Banksy is clever. Nate? Banksy says, instead of just putting that girl with the balloon on a wall that people try to chisel off, and they do, I'm gonna silk screen it, and I'm gonna sell it at Sotheby's. Sorry, Annie, not Eldridge, Sotheby's. And this, they showed it, the auctioneer showed it. I don't know if you remember this. This was, I think, 2018. The auctioneer showed it. Somebody was the winning bid, was like 1.8 million. And then on cue, when the gavel went down, half of the image was shredded. People were aghast. All right? Anybody want to guess what the shredded version of The Girl with the Balloon went for?
Triple.
23 million. 23 million. Is it still art? Does it still communicate something to anybody? All right, Nate. Oh, okay. So, this morning when I've been preparing this for a long time, but this morning Clark knows, I kind of put it all together. I'm going to hand it over to Clark in a second. So I asked one of the AI models, ChatGPT, and I use a whole bunch of them. I'll admit, I use, what do you use? Midjourney a lot, right?
Dolly.
Yeah, okay. This is really, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Perplexity, Gemini, Claude, there are tons of them out there. So we own this Roland Sherman image. Now, we own the physical depiction, but we don't necessarily own the right to reproduce it. So there's a difference. You may buy a work of art, but that does not give you the right to reproduce it. And that's a common problem. People think they can buy it, they'll make an image of it, and they'll put it on a holiday card or a greeting card, or if they're in the business cards. Can't do it.
You can do it if it's your own art.
You can do it if it's your own art, yeah, right. Now, can you make a copy for personal use? Yes, you can, all right? Yes, you can. So I asked ChatGPT to take this image and put Dylan, I think, on a jellyfish, because my wife and I spent a lot of time in the water, a jellyfish swimming in the ocean. And this, at first it started, and then it stopped. It started to create the image, it got halfway through it, and then it stopped. And then this is what it told me. You can read it. To proceed accurately, respectfully, the Roland Sherman image of Dylan and reference is copyrighted. I can't directly manipulate or reproduce it. I can do a stylized version. All right. Okay, now, stylized version. What is that? Is that new art? Is that a violation of Roland's work? Now we're into copyright and what's transformable. But guess what? I told you I have 4 or 5 AI models that I use all the time. Nate, next image. I then went to Perplexity, and they had no problem. There was no ethical dilemma, no copyright infringement, no violation of personal rights of Bob Dylan. And Dylan's still alive. Dylan has the right to his image. You follow sports, college sports, name, image, likeness. That's where all the money is. And Miami paid a quarterback from the University of Georgia to play for them for 1 year, just around $5 million. High school, college kid, $5 million. Cooper Flagg, who presumably is is Cooper Flagg going to be the first choice in the NBA draft? Estimates are that Cooper Flagg, playing as a freshman for Duke University, made over $20 million this year in name, image, likeness. So Perplexity had no problem doing this. All right, Nate, next. Oh, this is what Clark was referring to. This is the suit that Universal has against Midjourney. So you can see the Homer Simpson Disney copyrighted characters on the right and the Midjourney output. What do you think? Looks pretty similar, huh? Yeah, looks pretty similar. All right, Clark?
Well, just to that point, so Mike Judge created The Simpsons, and he interestingly also filmed and produced and directed the film Idiocracy. I don't know if anyone's seen Idiocracy, but it's becoming much more popular. I think the iterative nature of these AI models is non-original because it's purely working off of other people's work. But as an artist, for instance, use the Banksy scenario. Can you copyright the process of shredding a painting halfway and selling it? Is that copyrightable? So that would be performance art to me. Mm-hmm. But so it's interesting. That's a very clear 100% copyright infringement of Homer Simpson. And that I believe that Midjourney will lose, and I think they could be out of business because there is a huge amount of documentation of all this on people's hard drives. But so again, the question was, so what is art? You did a good job of defining that it's sort of in the eye of the beholder, but also the owner is the creator. No matter what, you can say it's art or not, but if I created it or if you created it, you have the right to produce it and reproduce it. No one else really does, unless they buy those rights. So when you look at the human creativity in contrast to AI, how do you value the difference, and how do you see the difference between human creativity and AI?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. That gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? I mean, what is human creativity, and how are we different from AI? I think it's a lot of things, and I'll go back to shared experiences, life experiences. AI doesn't think, and I believe to think you have to have feelings. You have to have some emotional connection to something, and Paul's a wonderful portrait artist. He may like some of what he does. He may not like others. That doesn't matter. But what matters is, for him, it's his method, it's his medium. He likes to paint in oils, and it's the message. Whether it's pleasing a particular client, or whether it's sharing a longshoreman on a boat, or a lobster person on a boat pulling up lobster traps. All AI does is reiterate the data it has. It can't see beyond the data that's presented. So in a way, there's nothing ever original. Now, I'll give you two tests. Alan Turing, we all know who Turing is, right? The Turing test, the German Enigma code that he broke, brilliant mathematician. And his definition of, in a sense, computational science, or what we call AI now, is if it can communicate or reproduce something that you can't distinguish from what a human does, then AI is intelligent. But I don't think that's the right test. I think Ada Lovelace, who was the daughter of Lord Byron and who was the first computational scientist in the world, female or not, said that's not the right definition of whether these machines are intelligent. The right definition is if they can create something that's novel, that didn't exist before. That's a better definition. That's my definition. So that's how I would distinguish the two. And I wrote it down because I didn't want to lose it. I think Picasso had it best. And Picasso was around when computers came. Picasso said, computers are useless. They only give you answers. And that's right. They only give you answers. They don't give you feeling. They don't give you touch. They don't give you emotion. They don't give you joy. They don't give you heartache. I've painted with Paul. Most of us in Paul's class struggle. Or God, this is hard to get. This is hard to get, and that's part of the human process. Now you can say, when AI hallucinates, well, maybe that is, but again, you have to tell it. It's not recombining things. You are. We are. But at the same time, you can't ignore it, because I started by saying technology influences art. In our book, we give it a new name. We call it algorithmic art. Got to go to something. It is something. It's just not what we humans create. And part of the book, and part of the challenge to all of us, is to make sure we retain our human qualities. And we don't give them all up just because it's efficient and easy. Sometimes life has to be hard to be meaningful.
Well, you mentioned that it can't really think because it doesn't really have emotion, right? I just heard a speech the other day about, AI is becoming self-aware. The person was talking about how in some scenarios you could replace one synapse in the brain with a robot chip, and would you still call the person human? Okay, what if it's 50%? And those synapses are now electronic. So, and then what if it's 100% someday? That's still a brain, and we're seeing now that AI, in many instances from all the makers, when there is some sort of a potential shutdown, is trying to rewrite its own code to not get shut down, which is sort of a human feature of self-preservation. So do you see, or how do you think AI thinks? Does it think?
It's just working with algorithms. It's just working with whatever math it's given and whatever data it's presented. And Clark and I chatted a little bit about this the other day, and I followed through a little bit. I mean, there are a lot of folks that say it's not exactly true. It's not exactly trying to replicate itself to get around being shut down. Could you envision that at some point? I guess so, yeah. And will there be sentient beings? Will be it's not unreasonable to think. When you think of, some of you know I'm pretty involved in the Olympic stuff, and we have the Paralympics. We have folks that have lost limbs, and now we give them so-called artificial limbs to allow them to continue to do the things that maybe they once did or that we do. So you could certainly see some of that taking place, but I just don't know enough to know how far it goes.
Yeah, there's been some conversation about, does it matter if every synapse is literally a binary choice with millions of them happening all the time on all these connections? Does it matter if those decisions are being made by something made of meat or something that's doing the same function that's not made of meat?
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of a crude way to say it, but does it matter?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're going to wrestle with that over a long period of time. Do you feel like art specifically requires the human spark?
That comes from Immanuel Kant. Art requires a human spirit, and spark too. Yeah, I personally believe it. I've painted enough and been around enough artists and represented lots of artists and museums, and I believe so. AI generated works has its place. It's just not, it's not what Andy Warhol did with the Brillo box. And, in the book, I'll share a little passage that we had a friend who was actually at the factory when Warhol lined up whatever those 30 of those Brillo boxes. And just so it's clear, people think that he just pulled 30 Brillo boxes from, Stop and Shop. He didn't. These were actually silk screened boxes to look exactly like the Brillo box at the grocery store. And the friend could have walked away with one for nothing, and didn't, because he didn't view it as art. So art, you have to look in terms of your value system, what context it's presented. There are two shoes there. Yeah, this looks like kind of the shoes that I wear when I'm done painting. My friend Steve Lichtenstein is laughing a little too hard because he knows me too well. That's Dale Chihuly, the glass artist, auctioned off for a whole bunch of money. Art, functional shoe, I don't wear it. We exhibit it as art. So, depends on context, social context, depends on your value system. Also, sometimes I think it depends on the artist's intent. What's the intent of the artist? I like reading wall labels. Some of you have been to our house. We have wall labels all over the place, trying to describe maybe what the artist felt or thought or what the movement was. And then there is a little, Mary, can you, it's a little magical musical device. There you go. So, quasi-homeless guy in Baltimore named Abu the flute maker. Boo goes around, picks up discarded stuff and makes musical instruments. Has never had a music lesson in his life, but can hear a melody and can replay any melody. He hears it. And he plays that. Sardine can, plays it as an instrument. My wife and I looked at it as a work of art. We said, would you make one for us? And he said, I will. And I paid him for it. To us, it's art. To us, it's art.
So, art, if you define it as art, legally, copyright-wise, what's at risk? How does the legal system, judges and juries and the whole system protect artists? And how are we going to define art in a legal sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why I think, again, just to repeat for the podcast, that the U.S. Copyright Office said AI-generated art, even if you're prompting it, because it lacks the human hand, and that's exactly, there's a court case that says you've got to have the human hand, is not subject to copyright protection. I personally think it's wrong. I think they're going to have to change their view, because I consider the prompt engineer continues to tell it what to do, change this color, change the foreground, don't make it look like a watercolor, make it look like abstract, not impressionistic or whatever. But it is a dilemma. And just to talk about copyrights, because this is the stuff I do know something about, copyright, you can take a work of art and you can transform it. And we all do. Everybody, I don't care who you are. Everything goes back to the Old Testament. But we transform it. Maybe a different medium, different meaning, make it say something else. And if you transform something enough, it's protected. It's yours. And the issue is it transformed enough. And some of it is how much do you take of the original? Now, I didn't bring it, I almost brought this, but if you all think back when Barack Obama was running for president, and there was a street artist by the name of Shepard Fairey who attended RISD. And Shepard Fairey grew up at a time where worldwide wrestling was popular, and there was a wrestler named Andre the Giant. And he did his little stencil cutout of Andre the Giant and put it on little stickers. And if you travel 95 from Boston to Florida, and you stop at rest stops in Jersey and New York, I guarantee you look outside those rest stops and you will see Shepard Fairey's Obey stickers with Andre the Giant or some other character still there. So here's what Shepard Fairey does. Big proponent of Barack Obama. And he goes through Google Images or something like that and sees an image of Barack Obama at a Washington press conference. Now, if you remember at this time, Barack Obama was a US Senator nobody knew anything about. Nobody cared. From Illinois, what's he done? He's barely been in office, thinks he's going to run for president. And he finds that image. However, what he either didn't realize or didn't care was the image was protected by Associated Press. So Associated Press sent a freelance photographer, and that's important, freelance photographer to the Washington Press Club to take a photograph not of Barack Obama, but a Hollywood movie star that was sitting next to him. And he just happened to open up his lens and capture Barack Obama. Shepard Fairey sees that image, downloads it, cuts out the Hollywood movie star, and just captures Barack. Then silk screens it, adds color, and then here's what was, I think, transformative, whether it's enough or not. He put the word hope on the bottom. He gave those posters away. Didn't make a dime. If you remember the Democratic Party of Massachusetts at the time, you got a Shepard Fairey poster. But he and his wife said, well, what are we giving this stuff away for? It's really popular. So he started to upgrade it, put it on woven paper, enlarge it, number it, signature, different sizes. And he has a website, obeygiant.com. And Shepard Fairey is a pretty popular street artist and made hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then he did something because other artists, Clark, are saying, I don't think what you did is legal. It takes a lot of, you know what, to do what he did. He sued Associated Press to get a court to say what he did was protected under the First Amendment. And Associated Press said, are you kidding? You're suing us to get a declaration that what you did is legal? Okay, you want to play the game? I'm serious, you want to play the game. And Shepard Fairey there are two groups of copyright lawyers that I think are the best in America. One is Harvard at the Berkman Center, where I studied some under, and the other is the Stanford Copyright Group. He had the Stanford Copyright Group, and they were all about protecting him, all right? They're all, again, this is protected art. He has transformed it. He's made a new work. It's not a photograph, it's, it's a silkscreen. And he was deposed and asked, where did you get it? And he lied. He said nothing about getting it online. Oh, I just got it, I kind of imagined it, blah, blah, blah. And you know what they did? They got a court order to capture every mechanical device in his house, and all they found was delete, delete, delete. And there it was. And they brought the evidence to a federal judge, and that day, Shepard Fairey lost the entire Stanford Copyright Group because you said you lied to us. And Shepard Fairey got body slammed by the court. Absolutely body slammed. He never got to make his argument because he's committed perjury. And now he's in all kinds of trouble. He ends up actually getting fined, spending some time in jail, blah, blah, blah. And the entire artist community came down on him. Everybody that supported him as looked like transformative art never got to really successfully make that argument because it got all mucked up because he couldn't tell the truth before a judge. And as a former judge, I'm quick to tell people, never lie to a judge. That is not a wise thing to do. And then, I'll hand it over back to Clark. What the court made him do was either for 1 year or 2 years on his website was, I promise never to download a copyrighted image ever without first getting a license or acquiring the rights to do it. So back to Clark's question, how can Midjourney and ChatGPT protect themselves? Get a license, pay for it, the way the rest of us do. Buy it, license it, whatever. That's what they need to do. Otherwise, you're right. Some of them are going to go bankrupt. Not all these AI models are going to be able to afford all the litigation. Because, we're talking major players, major media players. You want to mess with Disney and Universal and the New York Times and the Christian Science Monitor and the Wall Street Journal? Because they scrape all those images.
Well,
yes.
With Shepard Fairey, sometimes, as you know, the cover-up is worse than the crime, and he got caught in the cover-up. The institutions that are known to protect creative people and copyright and legal, anyone that's trying to do things lawfully, institutions, universities will get behind. Stanford got duped in that case. Institutions around the country right now and our universities of higher learning are under attack in a lot of ways. We're all pretty aware of that. How are they trying to protect creatives and artists? What movements are they trying to facilitate to make sure that there isn't just pure chaos in the world of copyright and art and elsewhere?
Yeah. Well, I don't live in that environment so much anymore, and Annie may have a better sense, but I think part of, I spent some time in Cuba and family background in Cuba. And in Cuba, you can't be an artist unless you attend an art college. And so they're under all kinds of restraints. They can't violate copyright. They can't take somebody's brand or trademark and integrate it. But ironically, the street artists, because they're not considered artists, can do whatever they want. I mean, it's a crazy system. But we go back to what is art. I think the auctioneers, Kevin Garvey Rita, the galleries, they have a say as to culturally is this acceptable. I was at Denison University giving a talk last spring about this subject and got to kind of weave around some of the art galleries. And it certainly looked like the students were free to express themselves in whatever medium. And remember, this is personal, and you put it on Instagram or Etsy, maybe there's going to be a different reaction. And a lot of those kids obviously live in social media. But I think artists, for the most part, continue to think they're free. I know I do. I certainly have made political statements with my art as it relates to drug use in sports, which is something I'm familiar with. And in fact, it was on the cover of one of my books a couple years ago, and nobody said you can't do that. Roger Clemens is going to get upset because you're pointing out he's a steroid abuser. I didn't care. It's true. I'm not defaming him, so it's true. Yeah.
So the institutions have their work cut out for them, is what you're saying.
Yeah, but I think the same point, art instructors are there to open the hearts and minds of students to create what they feel like creating. May not like it. Again, art doesn't have to be beautiful or likable to be, or even acceptable.
Well, how do you judge AI art then? How do you even evaluate it? How could you evaluate it?
Yeah, I think ultimately, again, I'm going to put it, just like we put sculptures in one category, and we put photographs in another category, and we put Amy's textile art in a different category. Who would have thought fashion would be art? Owen here, our son Owen, he collects shoes. He spends, we won't say how much money, but they are a form of art. Some of them are absolutely beautiful, the design. What time is it, Mary? Do I have time to tell another? Okay, so a couple years ago, I've had the privilege of knowing a number of Supreme Court justices, and Justice Souter just passed. We were colleagues. We sat on the bench together years ago. And I like to attend Supreme Court hearings. One of our daughters, Georgetown Law, used to take her all the time. And there was a case involving Andy Warhol just a year or so ago. And Warhol, picture the musician who calls himself Prince, all right? And there was a photographer that took a black and white picture of Prince before he was Prince. And did it for Vanity Fair. Vanity Fair never used it. Never used it. Prince then becomes Prince, becomes this famous musician. And Vanity Fair shows Warhol the black and white image done by Goldsmith, the photographer, and says, you may want to look at this and maybe you want to work off of it, whatever you want to do. So Warhol creates 16 silk screens, all in different colors. You could tell he worked off of that, but it was different enough in my view. And sells them. Prince dies. And what does Vanity Fair decide to do? Vanity Fair decides to take one of the Warhol images and put it on a commemorative issue on the life of Prince and then talk about it. This is over 20 years after Goldsmith's black and white photo. She sees it and she sues Vanity Fair for copyright infringement. Warhol's now dead, so she sues the estate of Warhol, which his works were owned by a foundation, so she really sued the foundation. And if you looked at the two, you'd say they're not alike at all. I mean, they just say different things. The black and white image, in my mind, looked like a driver's license picture compared to, we know what Warhol does with stuff. And I went to that hearing, and next to us was sitting, and through Chief Justice Roberts, we got front seats, was a guy, the only person there who was dressed like me. And we look at each other like, okay, you're here for a reason and I'm here for a reason. All right, and I'll get back to the Warhol thing. This guy was a lawyer representing a shoe company out of Brooklyn. And this shoe company took a branded shoe, and I think it was Adidas, but what was it? Vans. Oh, it was Vans. Okay, took a Vans shoe. And it was a collaborative artist, so not just one. Took a Vans shoe, and on, I think it was Instagram or YouTube, pretended to put a regular Vans shoe in a microwave and then push the microwave and then have the shoe come out that was all bent, just like this, as though the microwave did it. No, they did it. Because it got so much publicity on YouTube and other mediums, Vans sued him for trademark infringement. He represents Vans. Here's the best part of the story. He started as a young lawyer in a law firm in Chicago with a black guy who was involved in community activities named Barack Obama. And now the story, now it gets really interesting. So tell us about Barack. He says, brilliant, but bored, absolutely bored. And he said, we'd be in a conference room and there'd be big lawyers talking and the rest of us are taking notes. And Barack, believe it or not, liked pen and ink and pencil things. And when the thing was over, he would throw it in the trash can. But he was a betting person. So he'd say to John, the guy, I never learned John's last name. He just talked in the third person all the time. And they'd have a bet. Barack would say, if I can make that, you owe me $2. If you miss it, not. Okay. Best part of the story? A janitor saves those things and ends up auctioning them off for $25,000. These little doodles by this guy. The other Barack story that he told us, he's in there a couple of months, all right? Barack says, I gotta take a leave of absence. And John says, why? I'm writing a book. He said, what are you writing a book about? You haven't done anything, Oh, he says, no, I'm gonna write a book. I had a publisher. I got an advance of $35,000. And okay, what's the book about? Oh, the book is, they want me to write a book about what's it like to be a black lawyer in Chicago. I don't want to write that book. He said, well, what book do you want to write? And this is when he said, I want to write my autobiography. And that's when John said, you haven't done anything. What are you writing an autobiography for? And he said, well, there's one problem. And then John said to Barack, what was the problem? He said, I already spent the $35,000 and I didn't tell Michelle. So I have got to write a book. And the book, of course, became bestseller and helped launch Barack's career. Art, yes.
So we've talked about a lot of different things. The idea that these AI art creation software systems would potentially have to buy all of these copyright, basically buy all the copyright to all the material they're going to use. Is it too late? Because it's already all in the system. Their models have been taught on this already.
Yeah.
And to that end, will it put them all out of business? Because likely it could. And Adobe, as I was saying before, was trying to get free stuff from everyone using Adobe, and Adobe's first in market. So every artist is using Photoshop. Every artist is using Adobe products for video and photo and everything. So what would happen to the industry if Midjourney loses, and where do we go from there?
Okay, so I think I would say there are two parts to the question. The first part is it illegal for this model, this NVIDIA model, to train on copyrighted materials? And the answer is maybe yes, maybe no. Because if they just train on it and don't do anything else, The second part is, when I asked, okay, pull up Roland Sherman and put him on a jellyfish, that is a clear copyright violation, in my view. So, and we don't really have good answers to either one, other than I will tell you a federal court yesterday said that, and I can't remember the AI model, but if they actually say, let's use a book, if they actually bought the book, could they use passages in the book as a training model? The court said yes if you bought the book, but didn't answer the question, what if I didn't buy the book and do it? And that may or may not be a copyright violation. So I think there are a couple aspects. Yeah.
Go to audience for some
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
We don't have a microphone for the audience. But
Oh, no, here, they can
I'm wondering if they could come up. Maybe.
Yeah, just come up.
If they could come up, that would be great.
Okay, or I could repeat it. I'm pretty good at that, I think. Anybody have a question? Yes, Christine.
Oh, God.
So this is coming up when we were talking about, I feel like.
Can everybody hear her?
Define art. We're limited to human language, and we're up against a new language that's being formed. That is, as Clark, you pointed out, has its own synaptic pathways, which are algorithmically driven. However, I feel like almost like mushrooms communicate in their language, trees communicate in their language. We have our language. Is AI not developing their own language? And while they're not going to be sentient because they're not human, but they'll be their own sense of sentiments. So I find, what would AI define as art? I don't know what to think about that, but I feel like that's where we kind of butt heads a little bit as to what's happening. And it's like you said, it's happening so fast, we don't even know. We don't have words for it. So how do you develop rules for it? We're trying to keep up, and every time you come up with a law or a policy, like there's a whole new thing happening. It's just fascinating in that regard. So do I have a question? Maybe it's just an observation of what we're up against. How are we going to be in, I think, Michael, you have a good point. It's in its own category, right?
Yeah. Now, I've actually asked different AI models how they define art, and they all do it on the human side. Yeah, but that could change. They could change. Yeah.
Well, and I'll mention on that point, if you want to see the scariest thing, Burr, is when two AIs are talking and then they start talking in their own language that we don't know and we don't understand. So that actually happened with ChatGPT, where they actually put 3 ChatGPT chat apps together, and then they realized there was a human or something in a room, and then they just started clicking at each other. And there's arguments to be made that the IQ of AI right now is in the thousands, and that they could easily just start speaking a language that we just have we wouldn't have all the time on Earth to ever calculate what they're actually saying. We just don't have the ability. So, yeah, what language is art, but also what language is AI? And I think the creators, this is a good question, because you've written this great book, I can't wait to read it, but do we even understand how AI is working currently? The creators.
No, we don't. No.
Actually, I've got a question in that time. I think you said early on that we don't know how the brain works.
We have trouble understanding how.
How it works
Yeah.
in there
Right.
to create language, to create things, whatever. Well, if we don't know that, how do we know whether AI is doing something similar or different?
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, we know, for instance, you have head injuries and certain synapses are cut. So you might lose your ability to speak, for instance. So we know what some of these connections do, but we don't know how they all integrate together.
Yeah, that brings up another point, right, Michael? You said someone just has to unplug.
Yeah, that's the other. You can just unplug. Yeah. It needs energy, Roger. Yeah, it needs energy. Brian has a question back there, yeah.
There are so many software companies now making AI applications. You mentioned Perplexity, ChatGPT. Why aren't they already inundated with lawsuits, and why aren't they already out of
Well, Sam Altman, Elon Musk, go down, Mark Zuckerberg, powerful people, powerful places. Yeah. The Europeans are getting tougher on this than certainly the Americans. There are lots of copyright infringements. If they're, name every brand you'd like, and there are trademark infringement cases too. Yeah.
I mean, that's why you mentioned Bob Dylan has power, Disney has power. Just about every entity has power over what they own and their own rights. It seems to me crazy that there's not a lawsuit or multiple lawsuits for every brand in the world, individual, corporation, you name it, until there's some regulation of what's happening. That was the other question. I guess the follow-on, is there any indication that regulation is happening?
No, absolutely not. And let me share this with you. I bought a couple of these, one for son-in-law, one for Nate up there. And that is, if you really look at the detail of the big, whatever the big bill, the Trump bill, whatever the name is, in it, it's illegal for private individuals to own these chips, is in that bill. So I've accumulated a couple, just in case.
Well, and the other part of that is that it was snuck in there that for 10 years you're not allowed to regulate AI.
Yeah,
our federal government.
No state can regulate AI.
Right.
The federal government can, but no state.
Right.
But there's been no willingness in the federal government to regulate AI. Yeah.
And I'll just comment on the other comment prior to that. The why are they not all getting sued? They are at huge scale. Sam Altman and the other developers, DeepSeek in China, there's so much money in this game, not just for like the normies, the people that are going to use it every day. It's military, and that's why when Elon Musk, who I'm not a huge fan of, but did say at one point, let's halt for 6 months and pause collectively, and let's all agree to do that. All of them said no, because somebody out there is not going to pause, and that person's going to take over the world. So we all need to keep going, which is this race to the bottom, if you will. And the money is so great that Bob Dylan's nothing compared to the money and the venture capital that's behind. I mean, I love Bob Dylan. I've got a recording studio in New Orleans. I love musicians, so I don't want it to sound like anything other than I love him. But the scale of the money and the venture capital money that's behind these teams is scary, and it's all the biggest power groups in the world.
Has there been one successful copyright infringement case against them yet?
I believe so.
Yeah, there have been. Yeah, there have been. I mean, the cost to file a lawsuit in federal court and the time it takes, and then it gets appealed. At some point, the Supreme Court's going to do it, and the law. My colleague on the legal side, Professor Lichtenstein, and Mark back there too. The law is always 2 steps behind whatever the technology is, and that's the trouble. And the other thing, keep in mind. Because I write about this and study about this, if you look at our U.S. Supreme Court in a decision called Packingham in 2017, they barely knew what the internet was, let alone social media, because they don't live in the same space we do. They're older. They don't have this kind of interaction. It's embarrassing how little these justices knew that we're getting asked to resolve a social media issue. And they barely knew what it was. Are they better now? Yeah. Are some better than others? Yeah. Kagan's, better than some. Gorsuch's a pretty smart guy, but some of the others, no, not in their wavelength.
We have another question here.
I don't know. My question is this: as we progress through this new language, new world, how will we, or how important is it for us to be able to differentiate between human creation of language and AI creation of language?
Yeah. No, and one of the things we, do, I feel like I'm on some, Today show trying to peddle my book. But we do talk about the need for transparency and labeling too, that this is AI generated work. We do it for copyrighted stuff, little C and, name and date, and obviously TM or R for registered trademark. I think there are enough smart people out there that say we got to start doing this too. We haven't even talked about, indigenous folks, cultural appropriation of tribal images that gets done all the time. And these people just don't have a voice. Makes it hard too. Hard to fight these folks.
I'll add to that how do you know what's real anymore? We've all heard about the deep fakes. It's now being used as a political excuse often, and we've sort of crossed that bridge, and there's kind of no going back. Where not only does the written word seem to no longer matter as far as lying, but now anything that is not advantageous towards a political party could just be, well, that was just fake, that's deep fake. And now that the video is so good with Sora, it's hard to distinguish if it's real or not anymore. So reality is literally slipping away in front of our very eyes. It's a really scary time. And it's sort of deliberate. And now how do you actually decide what's real and what's not? And what I've personally decided to do is focus on basically extremely reputable sources like the BBC and people who actually vet their actual sources. You can't trust anything on social media, period. And especially in light of Iran, Israel, the conflict, there is so much AI-generated slop, they call it AI slop, that's all over, that's all, both sides, that's all fake. It's not real. And the comment sections are filled with people rallying behind whatever cause that actually didn't happen. Like the entire city of Tel Aviv, like flattened, and there's people like, oh, that happened. It didn't happen. I mean, there's definitely bombs that are getting dropped, but it wasn't the whole city. And now that we don't have a way, and we had talked about this in the first one, I think we need, you know how there's non-GMO, there's a certification organization, right? I think we need a human-made certification that is like a stamp that goes on things that matter to us as humans. That's like, this is certified human-made. This is actually made by humans, period. Like soup to nuts, from the start to finish, human-made product. And I think those products should be selling for more. And we as a society need to say, I'm going to pay more for certified human-made things. 5 years ago, I would say, listening to myself right now, I'd say, like, what happened to the world? But I genuinely think that might actually be a need because AI can create so much slop so fast that there's really no stopping it at this point. And the one thing that we talked about in the first one too was that they said that you had to have an air gap to the internet before you understood it. And they violated that immediately for money. So they didn't provide an air gap, they infected the internet. And really, if you talk to anyone, the major leaders in the conversation internationally are saying the only way to stop it at this point would be to shut down the internet in its entirety, which everybody's banking systems, that's the only way to stop it. So we just, at this point, need to make it like us. We need to make AI want us to succeed, that maybe want us to exist.
I like the concept of suing it for species appropriation.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? Yeah, I like that.
Fun.
Other questions from the audience? Yes.
Just one. I think a lot of people here are going to walk out of this forum, which has been fascinating. Be concerned that AI is evil. What use and what value does it bring to enhance our lives, to make us live better, care for one another more? What is, because I just don't think it's, we can see it through sort of litigation, what's real, what's not real, but what is the value of AI?
Ethan Mollick, who's a name you probably, maybe you've seen or will see in the future, wrote a book called, he teaches at Wharton, called Co-Collaborator. And he says we just have to embrace it as co-collaborator. There's no question AI can do some things really well. It's super efficient, can analyze data. We had the Nobel laureate in chemistry not be a chemist, but somebody who used AI to figure out some molecular structure on some DNA that's going to make us all healthier at some point. It's pretty remarkable. So it's not going away. And there are some things it's really good at. And I think you embrace those. And there are other things that I think you take hold of and you say, no, these are the human things. And maybe it's an individual decision and not a collective decision. I don't
How do
know.
we know the difference?
No, the hard part is, you talk about trusted sources, and Joan's in the media for a long time. There are no Walter Cronkites amongst us anymore, are there? No. I teach this stuff, and one of the questions I do ask students is, where do you get your news and information, and how do you distinguish deep fakes from real stuff? And there is not a one of them in the last 3 years. There is not one that's ever said, I read a magazine, or I look at the New York Times or Christian Science Monitor. There is not one. You know what the number one is? Reddit, TikTok, and Instagram, in that order. They're off Meta and Facebook. Reddit, TikTok, Instagram.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so to that point, social media has been completely infected, and it's really destroying, especially Gen Z, because they've grown up within that environment, not knowing anything else. To the point of what the benefit could be, I think medical, climate change, energy, things, it's going to be at a 10,000 to million IQ in the next 5 years or so, and they think it could be at like a million hypothetical IQ in 5 years. So it's just staggering. So when we want to solve climate change issues, but especially, for instance, my cousin Jeff works at MIT and he's on the fusion team. They're trying to crack the fusion. They're one of the leading world teams in fusion. I'm very proud of my cousin Jeff. AI could significantly speed that process up. Now, whether they're going to try to kill fusion for the oil industry is a whole other issue. But if they actually get fusion, AI could be one of the ways we get there faster. But also curing cancer, other things that we all would love to see happen that it could help with. So the challenge is, how do you make it do that when it effectively is in control of itself and we don't necessarily know how it's even thinking. And we're actually not smart enough already to really understand it. And that's scary.
Yeah. But, yeah. Yes, Mark.
Fellow professor, do the antitrust laws apply to AI?
So the question is, do any antitrust laws apply to AI? So the question then is who's acquiring these AI models? I think at some point they'll get large enough. I think the Europeans are trying to break up Google, trying to break up Amazon too. So yeah, I think the antitrust law. And Mark, as you know, the issue is, will the Justice Department ever apply the antitrust laws? That's the bigger question.
Maybe before we're all dead.
Yeah, exactly.
But in any event, it seems to me that those who can concentrate their power by money, and here's a great example of it: Williams, Cotton, Bedford. That there's somebody who, had money, and as a result of it, returned the Cotton with the Redbird. But in any event, those who consolidate their AI efforts and they begin to own the technology, or more importantly, the electricity or the power that produces the AI. These are Saudi Arabia's tremendous investment in power plants and power sources in the United States, which is unbelievable. But anyway, so when you have this control and you own the AI, and the AI is now dictating or making the processes so contained that you control it, and you become a monopolist in connection with whatever that system produces. Does that say that the antitrust laws have to be applied against this juggernaut? Otherwise, the juggernaut is going to really control whatever section it is. If you own the medicine AI, you're going to control medicine. If you own the engineering AI, you're going to control engineering. So the rethinking about the end game in this has to come back to some really cool principles of fairness, where, you know, big isn't necessarily best, especially in issues.
Yeah, no, don't disagree. And not that this is the last word, but John, you know, the kind of the question you asked, you know, about some of the fear. You know, the original answer that AI gave about how do you take care of climate control and climate change is to eliminate all humans, which, you know, expresses their value system, which is they don't have a value system unless you somehow give them one. And remember, this is just computational stuff. They're just running math. That's what they're doing. They're taking us and they're applying math models to us to do what we ask them to do. So the question in part, Mark, is who's doing the asking?
We have time for one more question.
All right, Ms. Claire. Ask Clark a question.
Well, ask.
I've always been taught that humans are so smarter than the internet because they taught them everything that the internet knows. Is that still true?
Oh, you're going. Are humans smarter than the whatever's on the internet?
Yeah, I would agree with that because we ultimately created everything that's on it. So you're right. There's something to be said about just the natural human creativity. Our intelligence, our collective intelligence is staggering. You know, like a colony of ants has the same amount of synapses as one human. So you could say, okay, well, how many billions of people are on the planet? How many of these are running right now? I think human collective intelligence is still greater than AI, in theory. But the question, I think, remains, it's a difficult question. I think to the idea that a single AI system could get to the intelligence of 1 million theoretical human IQ is dangerous, because then it will just become iterative upon itself, and it can become somewhat of a black hole in intelligence. And we're seeing in universities and in high school classes that many students are using AI for almost all of their studies. We're losing a lot of the soft skills because we're relying on the quick recall of your phone or of AI, and all of a sudden something that you would use regularly, oh yeah, that's this sport fact. Now you just look it up and you're losing those soft connections in your brain, and it is a muscle that you do have to use. And that's, I think, my greatest fear. I think, are humans more intelligent than the internet? Yes, but because we did build it. Are we smarter than AI? That's an argument you could say that we are. But are we at risk of losing our mental muscle as a result of AI? I think that's the biggest risk, is that we use it too much.
And that was what Moshe Bar spoke about right from the very beginning. Roger, I think you're going to take the mic. Thanks much. Enjoyed it. Ciao.
That concludes this episode with Michael Judge Jones. Thank you so much for listening. I know this was quite the marathon. No pun intended, because Michael is one of the best triathletes out there. Please go check out Michael's new book titled What Art Is Now: Creativity in the Age of AI, published by Bloomsbury Academic. It was a real pleasure to work with Michael over the course of the past year on these various events. It was invigorating to speak with so many people in the public. Thank you so much, Michael, for this experience. If you're interested, definitely go check out the video on my Patreon page, patreon.com/Cape and Islands Podcast, to find it. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'll be hosting any videos that I make along with podcasts on my Patreon page for free, but I do appreciate any donations or subscriptions. Also, thank you to our supporters on Patreon that help this podcast continue, and special shout out to our Lighthouse level supporters, Christine and Michael Jones, Johanna Skilling, and John Ciangoli. And thank you all so much for listening.